Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Mason Blackwood wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the construction site. At 42, he had built Blackwood Construction from nothing into one of Denver's most respected commercial contractors. The gleaming steel framework of what would become the Riverside Medical Center represented their biggest project to date, a $38 million contract that would either cement his company's reputation or break it. "Looking good, boss," called Hector Martinez, his project foreman and friend of 15 years. "We're still on schedule despite the supply issues." Mason nodded, satisfaction momentarily overriding his perpetual worry. "The structural engineers are coming tomorrow. Let's make sure everything's perfect." His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from his wife, Lindsay. "Don't forget Aiden's award ceremony tonight. 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late this time." Mason sighed. Lindsay's messages had taken on an increasingly sharp tone over the past year. Gone were the days of love you and miss you texts. Now every communication felt like a command or criticism. "Everything okay?" Hector asked, noting Mason's expression. "Aiden's getting some academic award tonight. Lindsay's reminding me not to miss it. The kid's smart as hell. Takes after his old man," Hector replied with a grin. "You should be proud." Mason's expression softened at the mention of his 16-year-old son. "Trust me, I am. Aiden's intelligence comes from his mother. The stubborn determination is all me." He checked his watch. 3:30 p.m. "I need to review the subcontractor bids for the Davidson project before heading out. Tell the crew good work today." In his job site trailer office, Mason lost himself in spreadsheets and material estimates, the familiar rhythm of numbers providing a comfort that his home life increasingly lacked. He and Lindsay had been married for 18 years, but the past 3 had been a slow erosion of whatever had once connected them. At 5:45 p.m., his phone rang. The caller ID showed Aiden. "Hey, buddy, I'm just wrapping up. I'll be there on time. I promise," Mason answered. There was a pause before an unfamiliar voice responded. "Mr. Blackwood? This is Officer Teresa Ramirez with the Denver Police Department. I'm using your son's phone." Mason's heart froze. "What happened? Where's my son?" "There's been an accident, sir. Your son was involved in a multi-car collision on Highway 470. He's being transported to Denver Memorial Hospital. The paramedics asked me to contact you." The world tilted beneath Mason's feet. How bad is it?" "Sir, you should get to the hospital as quickly as possible. The paramedics are doing everything they can." Mason dropped everything, barely remembering to tell Hector what had happened before racing to his truck. The 20-minute drive to the hospital was a blur of panic and prayer. At the emergency entrance, Mason identified himself and was quickly ushered to a waiting area where a young doctor with tired eyes approached him. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Dr. Winters. Your son Aiden is being prepped for emergency surgery. He suffered significant head trauma and internal injuries in the accident. We need your consent for the procedure." Mason signed the forms with a shaking hand. "Will he be okay? Please, just tell me he'll be okay." Dr. Winters' expression was carefully neutral. "The next 24 hours will be critical. The neurosurgeon is one of the best in the state. We're doing everything possible. Can I see him before surgery?" "Very briefly. Follow me." Mason barely recognized his son beneath the medical equipment. Aiden's face was swollen and bruised, his athletic frame suddenly small against the hospital bed. A ventilator breathed for him. "Aiden, it's Dad," Mason whispered, gently touching his son's hand. "I'm here, buddy. You're going to fight through this. You're strong, stronger than me." The medical team arrived to take Aiden to surgery, and Mason was escorted back to the waiting area. His hands trembling, he called Lindsay. No answer. He texted, "Emergency. Aiden in serious car accident. Denver Memorial Hospital. Please come immediately." After 30 minutes with no response, he called again. Still no answer. An hour passed, then 2. Mason paced the waiting room, alternating between calling Lindsay and praying for his son. Finally, after his 12th call, Lindsay answered. Music and laughter sound in the background. Mason, what is it? I'm busy. Lindsay, did you get my messages? Aiden's been in a serious accident. He's in surgery right now at Denver Memorial. Where are you? There was a pause, then a sigh. I'm in Paris. Paris? What the hell are you doing in Paris? We need you here. Aiden needs you. Another pause. Then, words that would forever change Mason's life. My son was in a car accident and fell into a coma. Shaking, I called my wife. Sorry, I can't come. I have a trip to Paris with my lover. Tears streamed down my face. Mason stood frozen, the hospital corridor tilting around him. Your lover? What are you talking about? I was going to tell you when I got back, Lindsay said, her voice oddly detached. I've been seeing someone else. It's serious. I'm with him now. Our son is fighting for his life, Mason said, his voice cracking. And you're in Paris with another man? I can't just get on a plane right now, Mason. Call my sister. She can help. Keep me updated on Aiden's condition. And with that, she disconnected. Mason sank into a chair, the phone slipping from his numb fingers. The betrayal was so complete, so callous, he couldn't process it. Their marriage had been struggling, yes, but this, abandoning their critically injured son, was beyond comprehension. Dr. Winters found him there an hour later, still staring blankly at the wall. Mr. Blackwood? The surgery is complete. Aiden survived, but he's in critical condition. We've induced a coma to reduce brain swelling. The next 72 hours will tell us more about his prognosis. Can I see him? Mason asked, his voice hollow. He's being moved to the ICU. You can sit with him once he's settled. His mother, she's out of the country. It's just me. Dr. Winters placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. The ICU staff will help you through this. You won't be alone. In the sterile quiet of the ICU, Mason kept vigil beside his son's bed. Machines breathed for Aiden, monitored his heart, delivered medications through multiple four lines. His young face was barely visible beneath bandages and swelling. I'm here, son, Mason whispered, holding Aiden's limp hand. I'm not going anywhere. You just focus on healing. As the hours stretched into days, Mason learned the routine of critical care, the hourly checks by nurses, the daily rounds by neurologists and trauma specialists, the careful monitoring of intracranial pressure and vital signs. He left Aiden's side only when forced, to shower in the family room down the hall, to choke down food in the cafeteria, to speak with doctors in hushed conferences about treatment options and uncertain prognosis. Lindsay called once, briefly, for an update. Her response to the news of Aiden's coma was a clipped, keep me posted, before another quick disconnection. On the fourth day, as Mason dozed in the uncomfortable chair beside Aiden's bed, his phone pinged with a text from Lindsay. Need to discuss practical matters. Aiden's medical costs, insurance situation. Call when convenient. No inquiry about their son's condition. No mention of returning to support either of them. That evening, Hector visited, bringing clean clothes and home-cooked food from his wife. The crew sends our prayers, boss. We got the site under control. Don't worry about anything except Aiden. Mason nodded gratefully. I don't know what I'd do without you guys. How's Lindsay handling this? Hector asked. I thought she'd be here. Mason stared at his sleeping son, then made a decision. She's in Paris, with her lover. She's not coming back. Hector's expression shifted from shock to anger. What the fuck? While Aiden is like this? Yeah, my thoughts exactly. What are you going to do? Mason's jaw tightened. First, I'm going to be here for my son. Then I'm going to figure out exactly what's been happening behind my back. After that, he let the thought hang unfinished. After Hector left, Mason used the hospital's guest Wi-Fi to access their joint accounts. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Over the past 6 months, Lindsay had systematically transferred funds from their joint savings to her personal account. Nearly $85,000 in total. Credit card statements showed purchases at luxury stores in Paris and Milano dating back months, plus hotel charges in Chicago, New York, and San Francisco. This wasn't a spontaneous fling. This was a calculated deception. Using Lindsay's saved password on their shared laptop, Mason accessed her email. There, in her sent items, was correspondence with a man named Reed Donovan, passionate exchanges discussing their future together, complaints about Mason, and increasingly concrete plans to leave the marriage. Reed Donovan. The name sounded vaguely familiar. A quick search revealed why. Donovan Development. Reed Donovan was CEO of a rival development company that had competed against Blackwood Construction for several major projects over the past 2 years. The recent loss of the Westbrook office complex bid to Donovan's company, a project Mason had been certain they would win, suddenly made more sense. Had Lindsay been feeding information to a competitor? The thought made his stomach turn. The next morning, as Mason sat beside Aiden reading aloud from his son's favorite fantasy novel, his phone rang. "Lindsay, Mason, we need to talk about money," she said without preamble. "My account access seems to be restricted. I froze the joint accounts," Mason replied coldly. "Given that you've already helped yourself to $85,000. A pause. I'm entitled to half our assets, and I still need access to Aiden's college fund for expenses here." Mason's grip on the phone tightened. "Expenses in Paris with Reed Donovan?" Another, longer pause. "You've been snooping." "No, I've been discovering the truth while sitting beside our comatose son. The son you abandoned for your lover. Don't be dramatic. Aiden's receiving medical care. There's nothing I could do if I were there. A mother should be with her critically injured child, Lindsay, not shopping in Paris with her lover. I've consulted an attorney," she said, her voice hardening. "I'll be filing for divorce when I return. I expect fair division of assets, including your business valuation. You'll get what the law requires, nothing more. And tell Reed I said hello. We have much to discuss about business ethics when he's not busy screwing my wife." Mason ended the call, then made a decision that would set everything in motion. He blocked Lindsay's number, called his bank to completely separate their accounts, and emailed his company's attorney to schedule an urgent meeting. That night, as he sat holding Aiden's hand, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest with each machine-assisted breath, Mason made a silent promise to his son. "I will protect you. I will be here when you wake up, and I will make them pay for every moment of pain they've caused us both." A week later, a text came through from an unknown number. "So, did our son pass away? If so, can I get a share of the insurance money and college funds?" Mason stared at the message, a cold rage crystallizing in his chest. His wife, the mother of his child, was inquiring about potential insurance money while their son fought for his life. In that moment, Mason Blackwood's transformation was complete. The dedicated husband who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family died, replaced by a man with a single focus: merciless retribution. Chapter 2. Vigil and Vengeance. For 18 days, Aiden Blackwood remained in a medically induced coma. Mason maintained his vigil, adapting to the rhythms of the ICU, becoming a fixture so familiar that the nursing staff began saving him containers of the better cafeteria offerings and bringing him extra blankets for his overnight stays. Dr. Winters, the neurologist overseeing Aiden's care, stopped by during evening rounds on the 19th day. "We're seeing promising signs, Mr. Blackwood. The intracranial pressure has normalized. We're going to start reducing the sedation tomorrow, see if he'll wake up for us." "And if he does?" Mason asked, the question that had haunted him for weeks finally spoken aloud. "What can we expect?" Dr. Winters sat down, his expression both kind and cautious. "Traumatic brain injuries are unpredictable. There could be significant cognitive or physical impairments. Or he could make a near-complete recovery. We won't know until he wakes up, and we can begin assessments." Mason nodded, having prepared himself for this uncertainty. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it. You've been remarkable through all this," Dr. Winters said. "Most parents take shifts, but you've been here constantly." "His mother is unavailable," Mason replied, the words bitter on his tongue. Dr. Winters simply nodded, having clearly drawn his own conclusions from Lindsay's absence. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow could be a big day." After the doctor left, Mason checked his watch, 9:17 p.m. Despite the late hour, he made a call to Frank Weaver, a former detective who now ran a private investigation firm that had vetted potential business partners for Blackwood Construction in the past. "Mason, how's your boy doing?" Frank asked upon answering. They're bringing him out of the coma tomorrow, Mason replied. Listen, I need your services. Personal matter. Name it. I need everything you can find on Reed Donovan of Donovan Development. And on my wife, Lindsay Blackwood. Their relationship, movements, communications, finances, everything. There was a pause on the line. This about why she hasn't been at the hospital? Yes. Say no more. I'll get on it first thing tomorrow. And Mason, I'm sorry you're dealing with this on top of everything else. Just find me what I need. The following day brought the first miracle. As the sedation was reduced, Aiden began showing signs of consciousness. First a slight increase in movement, then eye-opening, and finally, incredibly, recognition. Dad! The word was barely audible. Aiden's throat raw from weeks of intubation, but to Mason it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. I'm here, buddy, Mason said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son's hand. I'm right here. The hospital staff cautioned that this was just the beginning of a long recovery process. Assessments revealed that Aiden had significant left side weakness, memory gaps, and speech difficulties, all potentially temporary, all requiring intensive rehabilitation. But he was alive. He was conscious. He recognized his father. After weeks of uncertainty, these simple facts felt like impossible gifts. As Aiden stabilized and began the early stages of rehabilitation therapy, Mason finally allowed himself brief departures from the hospital. He met with his company's leadership team to ensure operations continued smoothly, consulted with his attorney about divorce proceedings, and had the first of many meetings with Frank Weaver. They've been involved for at least 14 months, Frank reported, sliding a folder across the table at a quiet corner booth in a downtown diner. Based on cell phone records, credit card statements, and hotel registrations. Started around the time you were bidding against Donovan for the Parkview Municipal Project. Mason flipped through the surveillance photos, his expression hardening as he saw images of his wife and Reed Donovan dining at exclusive restaurants, entering hotel lobbies, shopping at high-end stores. And the business connection? Frank grimaced. That's where it gets ugly. I've documented at least 3 instances where bid information from Blackwood Construction was accessed from your home network and emailed to Donovan before submission deadlines. Technical details from your proposals, pricing structures, the works. She gave him our confidential business information, Mason said flatly. Looks that way. There's more. Donovan's married to Elise Hammond Donovan. Old money, political connections. She sits on the boards of half a dozen charitable foundations that conveniently influence major development decisions in the city. Mason nodded, the pieces fitting together. So he uses his wife's connections to secure contracts while sleeping with my wife and using her to undermine my business. And one more thing, Frank added. Donovan's in financial trouble. His company over-leveraged on the Westridge development. Cost overruns, permit issues. He's desperately trying to secure new investors, but word's getting around about the problems. This information ignited the first spark of Mason's plan. So he needs money. Badly. Very badly. And soon. Mason closed the folder. Keep digging. I want to know every vulnerability, pressure point, skeleton in both their closets. What are you planning, Mason? Frank asked carefully. Justice. Mason replied, his voice cold. Nothing more, nothing less. That evening, as Mason sat beside Aiden's hospital bed helping him with speech exercises, Lindsay finally reappeared, 47 days after the accident. She swept into the room, wearing designer sunglasses and a carefully constructed expression of concern. Oh my God, he's awake. Why didn't anyone tell me? Mason stared at her with undisguised contempt. I blocked your number after you asked about cashing in his insurance policy while he was still comatose. Lindsay flinched, glancing toward Aiden, who was watching the exchange with confused recognition. That's not. I was just trying to understand our financial situation. Dad, Aiden's voice was stronger now, but still hesitant. What's happening? Nothing you need to worry about, buddy, Mason assured him. Just focus on your exercises. Lindsay stepped closer to the bed, reaching for Aiden's hand. Sweetie, I'm so sorry I couldn't be here. I was trapped overseas with work and... Paris, Aiden interrupted, the word clear despite his speech difficulties. You were in Paris. With someone. Lindsay froze, her practiced composure cracking. How did you? I heard Dad talking. Aiden said slowly. When I was asleep. I heard things. The revelation that Aiden had been partially aware during his coma, potentially hearing conversations around him, visibly shook Lindsay. Her hand withdrew from his, as if burned. We should discuss this privately, she said to Mason, her voice tight. There's nothing to discuss, Mason replied. Divorce papers have been filed. You'll be hearing from my attorney. You don't understand the situation, Lindsay insisted. Reed and I, it's complicated. And the financial aspects need careful consideration given Aiden's medical needs. Mason's laugh was hollow. Complicated? You betrayed our family, abandoned our injured son, and tried to destroy my business. That's not complicated. That's contemptible. Mr. Blackwood? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Aiden's scheduled for his PT session now. Perfect timing, Mason said, standing. Lindsay was just leaving. I have a right to see my son, Lindsay protested. Actually, Mason said quietly, the hospital has restricted visitor access based on Aiden's doctor's recommendation. Emotional distress could impede his recovery. You'll need to get approval from Dr. Winters before visiting again. It was a tactical maneuver Mason had arranged with the sympathetic neurologist who had witnessed the toll of Lindsay's absence on both father and son. You can't keep me from my child, Lindsay hissed as Mason guided her toward the door. I'm not keeping you from anything, Mason replied evenly. Your choices did that all on their own. After Lindsay departed, Mason accompanied Aiden to his physical therapy session, where the teenager was working to regain strength in his left side. Dad, Aiden asked as the therapist stepped away to retrieve equipment. Are you and Mom getting divorced because of me? Because of the accident? The question pierced Mason's heart. Absolutely not. Your mother and I have been having problems for a while. None of this is your fault, Aiden. Not one bit. But she wasn't here, Aiden said, his eyes filling with tears. The whole time I was trying to wake up, she wasn't here. Mason embraced his son carefully, mindful of the healing injuries. I was here. I will always be here. That's a promise. That night, after Aiden had fallen asleep, Mason met with his attorney, Gregory Santos, in a hospital cafeteria. The divorce filing has been submitted, Gregory confirmed. But there's a complication. Lindsay is claiming partial ownership of Blackwood Construction based on contributions to the business development and growth. Mason's expression darkened. She contributed all right by selling our proprietary information to a competitor. If you can prove that, it would significantly impact the asset division, Gregory said carefully. But corporate espionage allegations are serious. There could be criminal implications. I have proof, Mason assured him, but I'm not ready to use it yet. There's a bigger picture at play. Mason, Gregory said, lowering his voice, as your attorney, I need to advise caution. Whatever you're planning is perfectly legal, Mason finished for him. I'm simply ensuring that justice is served in the most appropriate manner. Later that night, alone in Aiden's darkened hospital room, Mason opened his laptop and began consolidating everything he had learned about Reed Donovan and Lindsay. Their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their secrets and lies. A plan was forming, intricate, methodical, and relentless. Not a crime of passion, but a calculated response to betrayal. A reckoning that would make them feel every ounce of pain they had inflicted on his family. As Aiden slept peacefully for the first time since waking from his coma, Mason made the first moves in what would become a merciless game of chess, transferring funds, establishing shell companies, and composing emails that would set traps his targets wouldn't see until it was too late. You wanted to share the insurance money? He whispered to the empty air. You'll get exactly what you deserve. Both of you. Chapter 3. Awakenings and Architects. 3 months after the accident, Aiden Blackwood was discharged from the rehabilitation facility. His recovery had amazed his medical team. The severe speech difficulties had resolved to a mild hesitation. His left side weakness had improved to the point where he needed only occasional assistance, and his cognitive testing showed near-complete recovery of his exceptional intelligence. Mason had spent the intervening time preparing for this day on multiple fronts. He had renovated their home to accommodate Aiden's needs, hired a part-time nurse to assist during school hours, and arranged for tutors to help his son catch up on missed academics. He had also delegated enough business responsibilities to ensure he could be present for Aiden's continued recovery. But beneath these visible preparations lay the elaborate groundwork of his revenge. "Welcome home, buddy," Mason said as he helped Aiden navigate the front steps with his cane. "I've got a surprise for you." Inside, Aiden's eyes widened at the transformation of their living room. A state-of-the-art gaming setup had been installed alongside adaptive equipment for his physical therapy. "Dad, this is incredible," Aiden said, his face lighting up with genuine excitement for the first time since the accident. "And that's not all," Mason continued, guiding Aiden toward what had previously been a rarely used home office. "This is your new music studio." The room had been converted with professional-grade equipment, keyboards, recording software, acoustic treatments, all tailored to Aiden's passion for composition and production. "How did you—" Aiden began, overwhelmed. "I pay attention," Mason said simply. "All those compositions you worked on before the accident. I thought you might want to continue them." Aiden embraced his father, the gesture containing all the words he couldn't express. That evening, as they shared their first home-cooked meal in months, Mason broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Your mom's attorney has requested visitation," he said carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Aiden pushed his food around his plate. "I don't know. She came to the rehab center twice. It was awkward. You don't have to see her if you don't want to," Mason assured him. "Dr. Parker said your emotional well-being is just as important as your physical recovery. She kept talking about this guy, Reed," Aiden said, his expression troubled. "Like I should be happy for her or something." Mason controlled his reaction, keeping his voice neutral. "What exactly did she say about him?" "That he makes her happy. That once everything settles down, they want me to get to know him." Aiden looked up, his eyes reflecting confusion and hurt. "She said maybe I could even live with them part-time when they get married." The casual mention of marriage was new information. Mason filed it away, suspecting it was part of a strategy to position Lindsay more favorably in the divorce proceedings. "What do you want?" Mason asked his son. Aiden considered the question carefully. "I want things to be normal again, but I know they can't be." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I don't want to meet him. Not now, maybe not ever. And I don't want to stay with them. I want to be here with you." Mason nodded, relief mixing with vindication. "Then that's what we'll make happen." After Aiden retired to his room, exhausted from the day's activities, Mason retreated to his makeshift office in the basement, a space entirely dedicated to his retribution project. One wall was covered with a detailed timeline of Lindsay and Reed's relationship, annotated with business dealings and financial transactions. Another displayed architectural plans of Donovan's troubled Westridge development, with critical structural points highlighted in red. The third held printouts of bank statements, property records, and shell company registrations meticulously organized in color-coded folders. In the center of it all sat Mason's laptop, the screen displaying an email draft to a carefully cultivated list of recipients. Frank Weaver's latest report had confirmed what Mason had suspected. Reed Donovan was accelerating his timeline. He had liquidated personal assets, taken out additional loans against his company, and was frantically courting new investors for the failing Westridge project. Meanwhile, he had purchased an engagement ring worth $64,000 from Tiffany & Company just 2 days earlier. They were making their move, which meant it was time for Mason to make his. The first phase of his plan required a seemingly innocent offering, a chance for Reed Donovan to save his crumbling financial empire and emerge as a hero in the development community. Mason drafted an email from one of his shell companies, Zenith Investments, LLC, expressing interest in acquiring a significant stake in the Westridge development. The language was carefully crafted to appeal to Donovan's desperation while appearing legitimately cautious. "Mr. Donovan, our investment group has been monitoring the Westridge development with interest. Despite the widely reported challenges, we believe the project has unrealized potential under the right financial structure. We would be interested in discussing acquisition of a 60% stake, with provisions for addressing the existing structural concerns our engineers have identified. Given the time-sensitive nature of your situation, we are prepared to move quickly if terms can be agreed upon. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting. Sincerely, Alexander Wright, Managing Director, Zenith Investments, LLC. Mason sent the email, knowing it would hit Donovan's inbox like a life preserver to a drowning man. The Alexander Wright identity had been carefully constructed with a legitimate-appearing digital footprint, complete with LinkedIn profile and business registrations that would withstand preliminary scrutiny. The second phase required exploiting the weaknesses in Lindsay's carefully crafted narrative about her relationship with Reed. For this, Mason needed to drive a wedge between them at precisely the right moment. Using the information Frank had uncovered about Reed's wife, Elise, Mason composed a second email, this one anonymous, to be sent at a strategically timed moment. Mrs. Hammond Donovan, as someone who sits on the boards of organizations dedicated to ethics and community values, you should be aware that your husband is planning to leave you for Lindsay Blackwood, with whom he has been having an affair for over a year. The enclosed photos and hotel receipts provide evidence. I believe you deserve to know the truth before their engagement is publicly announced. A concerned citizen. Mason saved this draft, attaching selected surveillance photos that clearly showed Reed and Lindsay together in intimate situations. This email would be his nuclear option, to be deployed only when maximum damage could be inflicted. The third phase involved the careful manipulation of Lindsay's expectations regarding the divorce settlement. Through strategic leaks via his assistant, whom Lindsay still occasionally contacted, Mason had allowed Lindsay to believe that Blackwood Construction was in a precarious financial position due to the hospital bills and Aiden's ongoing care. In reality, Mason had restructured the company's assets, secured additional lines of credit based on upcoming projects, and positioned the business for significant growth. The insurance had covered most of Aiden's medical expenses, and Mason's prudent financial management had ensured their security despite Lindsay's earlier withdrawals. Let her believe they were struggling. Let her think the divorce settlement would be minimal. The truth would be revealed only when it served his purpose. The final and most crucial phase involved Westridge itself. Using industry contacts and the documentation Frank had obtained, Mason had identified critical flaws in the development's structural design, flaws that had been covered up during inspections through bribes and falsified reports. These weren't merely cosmetic issues or code violations. They were potentially catastrophic defects that could result in structural failure if left unaddressed. Donovan had cut corners to save costs, and the evidence Mason had compiled would not only sink the development, but could result in criminal charges for fraud and endangerment. This information was Mason's ultimate leverage, a sword of Damocles hanging over Reed Donovan's head. The question wasn't whether to use it, but when and how to ensure maximum impact. As Mason reviewed his plans late into the night, his phone chimed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. We need to talk about Aiden's future and our settlement. Meet tomorrow, Lindsay, followed immediately by another. Reed and I want to present a unified solution that works for everyone. He has some ideas about Aiden's college fund management that could benefit us all. Mason's laugh held no humor. They were already positioning to access Aiden's college fund, the substantial account Mason had established years ago that now contained over $220,000. He replied with calculated brevity. Can't meet tomorrow. Busy with Aiden's care. Attorney handles all settlement discussions. Lindsay's response was immediate and revealing. Don't be difficult, Mason. Reed has financial expertise that could grow Aiden's college fund significantly. We're trying to help. Mason didn't bother replying. The text confirmed what he had suspected. Reed Donovan was eyeing Aiden's college fund as a potential source of capital for his floundering business ventures. The desperation was becoming more evident, which meant the trap was nearly ready to spring. Upstairs, Mason heard Aiden cry out, "Another nightmare," a common occurrence since the accident. He closed his laptop and climbed the stairs, revenge plans temporarily set aside as he focused on what mattered most, his son's recovery. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of his calculated retribution. Tonight, he was simply a father comforting his child through the darkness. Chapter 4. Bait and Switch. The response from Reed Donovan came faster than even Mason had anticipated. By 7:30 a.m. the following morning, an eager reply from Donovan Development appeared in the Zenith Investments email account. Mr. Wright, thank you for your interest in the Westridge development. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss your investment proposal at your earliest convenience. Contrary to some reports, the project remains on solid footing with tremendous upside potential. The challenges we've encountered are standard for developments of this scale and are being systematically addressed. I'm available for a meeting anytime this week. Please let me know what works for your schedule. Best regards, Reed Donovan, CEO, Donovan Development. The desperate undertone was evident beneath the confident phrasing. Mason allowed himself a small smile as he crafted Alexander Wright's response, proposing a meeting for the following afternoon at the Denver Capital Club, an exclusive venue where the real Alexander Wright, a wealthy investor from Chicago whose identity Mason had appropriated, held an actual membership. This was the riskiest element of Mason's plan, requiring perfect timing and the creation of a believable stand-in for the fictional investor. For this, he had recruited Calvin Reed, a former client who had retired from a successful career in commercial real estate and owed Mason a significant favor after Blackwood Construction had completed an emergency structural repair on his office building at cost. "Are you sure about this?" Calvin asked when they met that morning to finalize the details. "Impersonation isn't exactly legal. You're not impersonating anyone real," Mason clarified. "Alexander Wright doesn't exist. You're simply playing a role in a meeting, expressing interest that will never materialize into a signed contract. And the point is, to get complete documentation of the Westridge project's true condition," Mason explained. "Once he believes you're ready to invest, he'll share everything, including details he's hidden from other investors and regulators." Calvin frowned. "And when the deal falls through, won't he come looking for Alexander Wright? The shell company is legitimate, though untraceable to me. When you ultimately decline to invest citing insurmountable concerns discovered during due diligence, he'll have no recourse. Failed investments happen every day. What's your real endgame here, Mason?" Calvin asked, studying his friend's face. "This seems elaborate just to gather information." Mason's expression revealed nothing. "Justice requires precision. This is just one component of a larger equation." While Mason orchestrated the Zenith investment scheme, Lindsay escalated her efforts to meet with him outside of legal channels. She arrived unannounced at Blackwood Construction's headquarters late that morning, causing a stir among employees who had heard rumors but no details about the Blackwood separation. Mason's assistant, Valerie, intercepted Lindsay before she could reach his office. "Mrs. Blackwood, you don't have an appointment. Mr. Blackwood is in meetings all day. I need 5 minutes with my husband," Lindsay insisted, drawing curious glances from nearby staff. "It's about our son." Mason, alerted by Valerie's discreet text, chose to avoid a public confrontation. He met Lindsay in a small conference room, closing the door on the interested eyes of his employees. "Make it quick," he said, remaining standing to emphasize the meeting's temporary nature. "I have a client call in 10 minutes. Lindsay had dressed carefully for this encounter in a conservative blue dress that downplayed her usual flash. Her expression was calculated to convey reasonable concern. "I've been trying to reach you about Aiden's college fund," she began. "Reed has connections with an exceptional financial advisor who specialize in educational trusts. We could potentially increase the fund's value by 30% before Aiden reaches college age. The fund is performing well under its current management," Mason replied neutrally. "And it's structured as an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee until Aiden turns 25. This was only partially true. Mason had recently restructured the fund with precisely this type of maneuver in mind, but the changes weren't yet reflected in the documentation Lindsay would have access to. "That seems unnecessarily restrictive," Lindsay frowned. "As his mother, I should have equal say in his financial future. As his mother, You should have been at his bedside when he was fighting for his life, Mason countered, his tone remaining even despite the cutting words. Your recent interest in his welfare seems conveniently timed with your need for liquidity. Color rose in Lindsay's cheeks. That's unfair. I've always cared about Aiden's future. Is that why you asked about cashing in his insurance policy while he was still comatose? Mason asked quietly. That message was taken out of context, Lindsay protested. I was exploring all our financial options during a crisis. From Paris, with your lover, while shopping at Chanel. Mason checked his watch. My client call is in 5 minutes. Was there anything else? Lindsay changed tactics, her expression softening into something resembling regret. Mason, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But dragging this out only hurts Aiden. Reed and I are getting married after the divorce is finalized. We want to create a stable, blended family situation for Aiden's sake. Mason almost admired the performance. Interesting priorities. First abandon him, then use him as leverage for financial gain. Now claim concern for his stability. He moved toward the door. Aiden has made it clear he doesn't want to meet Reed or spend time in your household. I suggest respecting at least that much of his wishes. He's a child. Lindsay snapped, the compassionate facade slipping. He doesn't get to make those decisions. He's a traumatic brain injury survivor whose doctors have emphasized the importance of emotional stability in his recovery environment. Mason corrected her. And the family court judge agreed when granting me temporary full custody last week. This was news to Lindsay, whose expression shifted from irritation to alarm. You went to court without notifying me? Your attorney was notified. Perhaps you should check in with him more regularly. Mason opened the conference room door. Any further communication should go through our lawyers, as previously agreed. As Lindsay departed, visibly frustrated, Mason received a text from Frank Weaver. Donovan liquidated wife's family heirloom jewelry yesterday. $180,000 at private auction. She doesn't know yet. The desperation was escalating faster than anticipated. Mason adjusted his mental timeline, recognizing that Reed Donovan's financial house of cards might collapse before he could spring his carefully constructed trap. That evening, as Mason helped Aiden with his physical therapy exercises in their newly equipped home gym, his son broached the subject that had clearly been weighing on him. Mom's lawyer sent some papers for me to sign, Aiden said, struggling through a set of resistance band movements. About custody and visitation. Mason kept his voice neutral. What did they say? That I should spend weekends with her and Reed once they're married. That it would be in my best interest to have relationships with both my parents. Aiden's expression darkened. She didn't care about my best interests when she was in Paris while I was in a coma. You don't have to sign anything, Mason assured him. And at 16, the court considers your preferences significant, especially given the medical circumstances. Aiden completed his exercise set, then looked directly at his father. Were you and Mom having problems before my accident? Was she already with him? Mason hesitated, balancing honesty against protecting his son. We had been growing apart for a while, he acknowledged. But I didn't know about Reed until after your accident. Did I cause it? Aiden asked quietly. The problems between you and Mom? Absolutely not, Mason said firmly. Your mother and I made our own choices, good and bad. None of this is your responsibility or your fault. Aiden nodded, seemingly relieved. I want to testify to the judge about wanting to stay with you. The statement caught Mason by surprise. Are you sure? That would mean appearing in court, possibly being questioned by attorneys. I'm sure, Aiden said with unexpected conviction. Mom keeps pretending everything's normal in her texts and calls. Like she didn't abandon us when things got hard. Like she and Reed didn't. He trailed off, his expression troubled. Didn't what? Mason prompted gently. Aiden hesitated. I overheard her on the phone with him once, before the accident. She was talking about some proposal you were working on. Something about bid numbers and project specifications. It didn't make sense to me then, but now. Mason kept his expression neutral despite the surge of vindication. So Aiden had witnessed Lindsay's betrayal on multiple levels. Focus on your recovery, Mason advised, placing a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. The legal issues will sort themselves out. Later that night, Mason met with Calvin Reed to review the final details of the Alexander Wright impersonation. Calvin had been provided with a comprehensive briefing document on the fictional investor's background, investment philosophy, and personal mannerisms. "Remember, you're interested but cautious," Mason instructed. "You want to see everything: structural reports, financial projections, investor presentations, regulatory compliance documentation. The more desperate he is, the more he'll reveal." "And the recording devices?" Calvin asked, examining the modified pen and cufflinks Mason had provided. "State-of-the-art and undetectable. The pen captures audio, the cufflinks video. Between them, we'll document everything Donovan discloses." "This is starting to feel like corporate espionage," Calvin remarked uneasily. "It's not espionage when he voluntarily provides the information," Mason countered. "It's simply due diligence on an investment opportunity that ultimately won't materialize." As Calvin departed, Mason returned to his basement command center to prepare for the next day's developments. The Alexander Wright meeting was just one thread in the complex web he was weaving around Reed and Lindsay. Another crucial element was time to activate tomorrow. An anonymous tip to the Denver Building Department about potential safety violations at the Westridge development, accompanied by enough evidence to trigger an immediate inspection, but not enough to definitively implicate Donovan in wrongdoing. The inspection would find nothing conclusive. Mason had calculated the timing carefully to ensure the most serious issues remained hidden, but it would create additional pressure and scrutiny at the precise moment when Donovan was most vulnerable. Mason's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Mason, it's Reed Donovan. I think it's time we spoke directly man to man. This situation with Lindsay and Aiden needs a rational resolution. I'm not the enemy here." Mason stared at the message, a cold smile forming. Reed was initiating direct contact sooner than expected, another sign of escalating desperation. He considered ignoring the message, but recognized an opportunity to gather additional intelligence. "What exactly do you want to discuss?" He responded after a calculated delay. The reply came swiftly: "A potential partnership. There's no reason your construction expertise and my development vision couldn't work together profitably. Family complications aside, we're both businessmen." It was an unexpected angle, offering a business alliance as a peace offering. Mason recognized the manipulation attempt, but decided to explore where it might lead. "Interesting proposal. What kind of partnership?" "Westridge needs quality contractors for Phase 2. Blackwood Construction would be ideal. Premium rates, prominent placement. A win-win that might help smooth personal tensions." The true motive emerged. Donovan needed a reputable contractor to legitimize the troubled Westridge project. Mason's company name would lend credibility to attract new investors. "Send a formal proposal to my office. I'll review it." The response positioned Mason as reasonably open to professional engagement while maintaining personal distance. The perfect stance to encourage further overtures without committing to anything. Reed's final message confirmed Mason's assessment of his desperate state. "I'll have it to you tomorrow." And Mason, "I truly care about Lindsay and want what's best for Aiden. We could be allies rather than adversaries." Mason didn't respond. Let Reed believe his message had landed. Let him think there was an opening for negotiation. The illusion of potential reconciliation would make the coming destruction all the more devastating. The following day's meeting between Alexander Wright and Reed Donovan proceeded exactly as Mason had planned. Calvin played his role perfectly. The cautiously interested investor with deep pockets and a skeptical eye for detail. According to Calvin's report, delivered over secure phones from his car after the meeting, Reed had been transparently eager, presenting the Westridge development as a guaranteed success story experiencing temporary cash flow adjustments. "He showed me everything," Calvin confirmed. "Complete structural reports, inspection certificates, financial projections, the works." And Mason, those projections are pure fantasy. He's claiming 95% occupancy within 6 months when the current pre-leasing is barely at 40%. And the structural documentation? Mason asked the key element he needed. "Just as your engineer suspected. The foundation remediation was documented as completed, but the actual work was never performed. Same with the load-bearing modifications on the east wing. The paperwork says one thing, but the comparison photos you provided show it's fiction. Did you get all recorded? Every word, every document. The devices worked perfectly. He was so desperate for my investment that he didn't even notice me adjusting the pen for better angles. What about the escape clause? Did you establish it clearly? Calvin chuckled. Textbook execution. I told him Zenith has a mandatory 72-hour assessment period before committing to investments of this scale. He didn't even blink. Said he completely understood the need for proper due diligence. Perfect, Mason said. And the timeline? I promised a preliminary decision by Friday, with potential for immediate fund transfer if our analysis confirms his projections. Mason nodded to himself. 3 days. Enough time to compile and analyze all the evidence Calvin had gathered, but not so long that Donovan would secure alternate financing. You did well, Calvin. I owe you for this. Just make sure whatever you're planning is worth the risk, Calvin cautioned. Donovan struck me as a man on the edge. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. As Mason ended the call, a notification appeared on his computer screen, an automated alert from the system he had monitoring Lindsay's email account. She had just received a message from the family court indicating that Aiden's request to testify had been granted. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Simultaneously, another alert showed activity on one of Lindsay's credit cards, a $3,200 charge in upscale Denver women's clothing store, likely preparation for the court appearance. The pieces were moving faster now, events accelerating toward the inevitable collision Mason had designed. But as he reviewed the day's developments, a new thought emerged, a refinement to his plan that would increase its devastating impact without changing its fundamental structure. Opening his laptop, Mason drafted a new email from the Alexander Wright account to read Donovan. Mr. Donovan, following our productive meeting, Zenith's preliminary analysis reveals significant potential in the Westridge development, contingent upon resolution of certain structural concerns. Our engineers have identified specific remediation requirements that would need to be addressed before we could commit to the investment level discussed. I would like to meet again tomorrow with our technical team to outline these issues and determine if an expedited resolution is feasible within our investment timeline. Please advise if 2 p.m. at your Westridge site office would be convenient. Regards, Alexander Wright. This additional meeting would serve multiple purposes, reinforcing Donovan's belief in the investment's viability, creating documentation of his response to specific structural concerns, and providing an opportunity to gather even more damning evidence of fraud and negligence. The bait had been taken. Now it was time to set the hook. Chapter 5. Turning Tables. The morning of the follow-up meeting with Reed Donovan dawned with unexpected complications. Mason received an urgent call from Aiden's physical therapist. His son had experienced a setback during his session, collapsing with sudden vertigo and confusion. It's not uncommon with TBI recovery, Dr. Parker explained when Mason arrived at the rehabilitation center. The brain sometimes needs to recalibrate. We're running tests, but it doesn't appear to be anything serious. Aiden looked pale against the examination table, his frustration evident. I was doing so well, he said, voice tight with disappointment. Now this. It's part of the process, Mason reassured him, though his own concern ran deep. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're still making incredible progress. The incident forced Mason to recalibrate his own plans. The second meeting with Donovan, scheduled for that afternoon, would need to be handled differently. Calvin was unavailable on such short notice, and Mason couldn't leave Aiden while medical tests were being conducted. After consideration, Mason made a tactical adjustment. He called Frank Weaver. I need someone to play an engineering consultant at the Westridge site today, he explained. Someone who can identify specific structural concerns without raising suspicion. I know just the person, Frank replied. Janice Lynn, former structural engineer, now works with my agency on fraud investigations. She can talk the talk and spot any genuine issues. Perfect. Brief her thoroughly. She needs to maintain the Alexander Wright connection without committing to anything specific. With that arrangement in place, Mason returned his focus to Aiden. The medical team was conducting a series of tests, balance assessments, cognitive evaluations, neurological examinations, to determine the cause and significance of the episode. "Dad," Aiden asked during a quiet moment between tests, "what if I can't get better? Not completely?" The question revealed the fear Aiden had been concealing beneath his determined exterior. The possibility that his recovery might plateau short of his pre-accident capabilities. "Then we adapt," Mason answered without hesitation. "We find new ways to do the things you love. We redefine better on your terms, not anyone else's." Aiden considered this. Mom would hate that. She always wanted everything perfect. "Your mother's expectations are a problem, not yours," Mason said firmly. "Your only job is to heal at your own pace." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Winters, who had been called in to consult on Aiden's case. "Good news," the neurologist announced after reviewing the test results. "This appears to be a minor vestibular disturbance, not uncommon in TBI recovery. No indication of hemorrhage or increased pressure." The relief was palpable. "So he'll be okay?" Mason asked. "With some adjustments to his therapy regimen and possibly a brief course of medication, yes. I'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but I expect he'll be back to his regular activities within a few days." While Aiden was settled into a hospital room for monitoring, Mason took the opportunity to check on the Westridge meeting. Frank reported that Janice Lynn had successfully met with Reed Donovan, playing her role as a Zenith Investments engineering consultant with convincing expertise. She identified 3 critical structural issues that would need remediation before any investment could proceed, Frank explained. Donovan claimed they were already scheduled for correction and offered to provide updated plans showing the proposed fixes. Did she get it recorded? Every word, plus photographs of the actual site conditions that contradict his claims. She mentioned that Alexander Wright would need this documentation before Friday's decision deadline, and Donovan promised to deliver it all by tomorrow morning. Mason nodded, satisfied with the development despite the change in plans. "Perfect. Has there been any activity from Lindsay?" "She met with her attorney for 2 hours this morning, then had lunch with a woman identified as Elise Hammond Donovan." This caught Mason by surprise. "Reed's wife? Are you certain?" "Positive. They met at Levitt's downtown, sat on the patio." Body language suggested a tense but civil conversation. No raised voices, but intense discussion. This was an unexpected complication. If Lindsay was meeting with Reed's wife, multiple scenarios could be in play, none of which Mason had anticipated in his carefully constructed plan. "I need to know what they discussed," Mason said, "and whether Reed knows about the meeting." "I'll see what I can find out," Frank promised. In the meantime, Janice mentioned something interesting. While inspecting the Westridge site, she noticed fresh survey markers that weren't on any of the plans Donovan showed her. When she asked about them, he became evasive, claimed they were for future development phases not relevant to the current investment opportunity. Mason filed this information away, sensing it might be significant. Have her check if those markers correspond to any recent permit applications or zoning variance requests. After ending the call, Mason returned to Aiden's hospital room to find his son asleep, the medication for his vestibular symptoms having induced drowsiness. He settled into the familiar position in the bedside chair, the echo of those long vigil days during the coma still fresh in his memory. His phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay. "Heard Aiden's back in hospital. What happened? I'm coming to see him." Mason replied tersely, "Minor setback. He's sedated for tests. Visit tomorrow." Her response was immediate. "I'm his mother. I have a right to be there." "Like you were there during his coma?" Mason replied before he could stop himself, the rare emotional response slipping through his calculated exterior. There was a long pause before her next message. "Things weren't what they seemed, Mason. I was dealing with complicated issues you don't understand. We need to talk about everything." The cryptic nature of the message, combined with the information about her meeting with Elise Hammond Donovan, suggested a potential shift in the dynamic between Lindsay and Reed. Mason considered how to respond, weighing the value of intelligence gathering against maintaining emotional distance. "If you want to talk, come alone." Hospital cafeteria. 7 p.m. He finally replied. Setting the phone aside, Mason checked his secure email account for updates on the Alexander Wright operation. As expected, Reed Donovan had sent a comprehensive package of updated structural plans and remediation schedules, documents that, upon preliminary review, were clearly fabricated to address the concerns Janice Lynn had raised during her site visit. The fraudulent nature of these documents, combined with the recorded conversations in which Donovan misrepresented the development's condition, provided the final pieces of evidence Mason needed for his plan's execution. At 7 p.m., Mason made his way to the hospital cafeteria, securing a corner table with good sight lines to all entrances and minimal possibility of being overheard. Lindsay arrived precisely on time, dressed conservatively in a navy blazer and slacks, a calculated choice for a hospital setting, projecting responsibility and concern. "How is he?" she asked without preamble as she sat across from Mason. "Stable." The episode was related to his vestibular system, common in TBI recovery. "He'll likely be released tomorrow." Lindsay nodded, her expression showing what appeared to be genuine relief. "I'm glad it wasn't serious." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Mason, there are things you need to know about my relationship with Reed. I'm aware of the 14-month affair, the corporate espionage, and your plans to access Aiden's college fund." Mason replied matter-of-factly. "What else should I know?" The direct acknowledgement of his intelligence gathering visibly startled Lindsay. "How did you?" "I've been thorough," Mason interrupted. "The question is, what's changed? Why the sudden desire to talk about everything?" Lindsay's carefully constructed composure wavered slightly. "I met with Elise today, Reed's wife." "I know." Her eyes narrowed at this confirmation of surveillance, but she continued. She shared some concerning information about Reed's business practices and personal behavior, things I wasn't aware of when we got involved. "Such as?" Mason prompted, though he could guess much of what Elise might have revealed. "Financial manipulation, patterns of deception. Apparently, I'm not the first companion he's used to gain competitive advantages." Lindsay's voice held a note of genuine distress. "And there are issues with Westridge that go beyond standard development challenges." "You mean the fraudulent structural reports? The bribed inspectors? The foundation defects that could result in catastrophic failure, if not properly remediated?" Mason supplied calmly. "Or perhaps the fact that he's been siphoning investor funds into offshore accounts while the project slides toward insolvency?" Lindsay stared at him, shock evident in her expression. "You know all of this? How long have you known?" "Long enough to compile comprehensive documentation," Mason replied. "The question is, what do you intend to do with your newfound awareness of Reed's character?" Lindsay seemed to struggle for words, an unusual state for someone typically so verbally adept. "I've been a fool," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "A complete, utter fool." "Yes," Mason agreed without inflection. "You have. He used me to get information about your business. He never intended to leave Elise. Her family connections are too valuable to his operations. And now that I've served my purpose," she trailed off, the implications clear. "Now he needs access to Aiden's college fund to temporarily shore up his failing development." Mason finished for her. Hence the sudden interest in marriage and family stability. Lindsay nodded, looking genuinely shaken. "Elise showed me texts he'd sent her, promising their marriage was solid, claiming I was just a convenient business resource. He was playing both sides the entire time." Mason observed her carefully, assessing whether this apparent disillusionment was genuine or simply another manipulation tactic. Her body language suggested authentic distress, but Lindsay had always been a skilled performer when it served her interests. "What exactly do you want from me, Lindsay?" he asked directly. "I want to fix this," she said, meeting his gaze. "Not our marriage. I know that's beyond repair. But I want to make things right with Aiden. I want to help you stop Reed before he damages more lives." She hesitated before adding, "And I want to testify about his business practices and the information I shared with him. It won't undo the damage to your company, but it could help prevent future harm." The offer was unexpected, potentially valuable, but also potentially a trap. Mason considered his options carefully. "If you're sincere, There are specific actions that would demonstrate your commitment, he said finally, beginning with a sworn affidavit detailing your knowledge of Reed's business practices, including the corporate espionage involving Blackwood Construction. I'll do it, Lindsay agreed without hesitation. And I want to withdraw my custody petition. Aiden belongs with you. I see that now. My behavior during his hospitalization was unforgivable. On that we agree, Mason said, his tone cooling further. Your text about his insurance money while he was comatose revealed your true priorities. Lindsay flinched visibly. I can't justify that. I was caught up in Reed's world, his values. It doesn't excuse my actions, but I want you to know I deeply regret them. Mason maintained his emotional distance despite the apparently heartfelt apology. Too much damage had been done for easy reconciliation, and his plan was already in motion, a plan that would devastate Reed Donovan regardless of Lindsay's change of heart. I'll have my attorney prepare the affidavit for your signature, he said, and I expect full cooperation with any subsequent legal proceedings related to Reed's business activities. You'll have it, Lindsay promised. There's one more thing you should know. Reed is planning to announce a major new investor for Westridge tomorrow, someone called Alexander Wright from Zenith Investments. He believes this will solve all his financial problems. Mason kept his expression neutral despite the internal satisfaction of hearing his trap confirmed from an unexpected source. Is that so? Interesting timing. Mason, Lindsay said, leaning forward slightly, whatever you're planning for Reed, and I can see you're planning something. Please be careful. He's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I'm well aware of the risks, Mason assured her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on our son. As he stood to leave, Lindsay reached out suddenly, catching his arm. I know you'll never forgive me for what I did during Aiden's hospitalization. I don't expect that, but please believe that I love him, even if my actions didn't show it. Mason looked down at her hand on his arm until she withdrew it. Actions define us, Lindsay. Not words, not intentions. Remember that when you're preparing your testimony against Reed. He left her sitting alone in the cafeteria, her composed facade finally crumbling as the full weight of her choices settled upon her. Returning to Aiden's room, Mason found his son awake and alert, the medication having worn off. Hey, buddy. Feeling better? Yeah. The room's not spinning anymore, Aiden confirmed with relief. Was that Mom I saw heading toward the elevators? Mason nodded, taking the chair beside the bed. She came to check on you. We had a conversation about some changes to the custody arrangements. Is she still trying to make me stay with her and read? Aiden asked, tension evident in his voice. No, Mason assured him. Actually, she's withdrawing her custody petition. You'll continue living with me full-time. Aiden's relief was visible. Good. I don't want to be around him. There's something off about him. You have good instincts, Mason said, impressed once again by his son's perceptiveness. Rest now. We'll likely be heading home tomorrow. After Aiden drifted back to sleep, Mason stepped into the hallway to call Frank Weaver with updated instructions based on the evening's developments. Lindsay's turning on Reed, he explained succinctly. Claims she wants to help expose his fraudulent business practices. Do you believe her? Frank asked, the skepticism evident in his tone. Irrelevant, Mason replied. Whether she's sincere or playing another angle, we proceed as planned. But add surveillance on her movements. If she warns Reed about our operation, I want to know immediately. And the Alexander Wright meeting tomorrow proceeds exactly as scheduled. Donovan believes he's securing a major investor. Instead, he'll be providing the final evidence we need. Mason ended the call and returned to Aiden's bedside, mentally reviewing the components of tomorrow's carefully orchestrated downfall of Reed Donovan. The timing had been compressed due to unexpected developments, but the essential structure remained sound. By this time tomorrow, the man who had helped destroy his family would begin experiencing the systematic dismantling of everything he valued. His business, his reputation, his freedom, and his future. It wasn't simply revenge. It was justice, meticulously designed and precisely delivered. Chapter 6, Checkmate. The final phase of Mason's plan unfolded with the precision of a master chess player executing a long-contemplated endgame. By 9 a.m., Reed Donovan had sent an exuberant email to Alexander Wright, confirming their meeting at the Westridge Development Office and attaching revised structural plans that purported to address all the concerns raised by Janice Lynn. These fabricated documents, created overnight and bearing falsified engineering stamps, were the last pieces of evidence Mason needed to complete his case against Donovan. The deliberate creation of fraudulent technical documentation crossed the line from questionable business practices into criminal fraud. At Denver Memorial Hospital, Aiden's morning assessment showed significant improvement in his vestibular symptoms. "We can discharge him this afternoon," Dr. Parker informed Mason. "Continue the medication for 3 more days, and we'll reassess his therapy schedule next week." "That's great news," Mason replied, genuinely relieved. "He's been frustrated by the setback." "That's actually a good sign," the doctor noted. "His determination to recover is one of his strongest assets. Just make sure he doesn't push too hard too quickly." With Aiden's discharge scheduled for 2 p.m., Mason had a narrow window to execute the critical components of his plan. He left the hospital briefly, entrusting Aiden to the care of the medical staff, and drove to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of downtown Denver. There, in a conference room rented for the day, he met with the key players in Reed Donovan's imminent downfall: Frank Weaver, Janice Lynn, his attorney Gregory Santos, and 2 individuals he had recruited specifically for this operation: Bradley Chun, a senior investigator from the Colorado Division of Securities, and Melissa Oakes, a reporter from the Denver Business Journal who specialized in commercial real estate coverage. "Everyone clear on their roles?" Mason asked after reviewing the final sequence of events. Bradley Chun nodded. "The evidence you've compiled is compelling. My team is prepared to execute the regulatory actions once the final documentation is secured from today's meeting. And I have confirmation from my editor for the exclusive," Melissa added. "Once Mr. Chen's team initiates their action, we'll publish the investigative piece detailing the Westridge fraud scheme." Remember, Mason emphasized, timing is everything. Each component must activate in the proper sequence for maximum effect. Gregory Santos, ever the cautious attorney, raised a concern. "Mason, while everything we're doing is technically legal, you're walking a very fine line with the Alexander Wright impersonation. If Donovan later claims entrapment." "He won't," Mason interrupted confidently, "because doing so would require admitting he knowingly falsified structural safety documentation to secure investment. The damage to what remains of his reputation would far outweigh any potential legal advantage." At 1:30 p.m., Janice Lynn departed for the Westridge site office, where she would meet with Reed Donovan in her role as Alexander Wright's engineering consultant. Her recording devices had been supplemented with a direct feed to Bradley Chen's team, allowing real-time monitoring of Donovan's statements and commitments. Mason returned to the hospital to complete Aiden's discharge process, maintaining the appearance of a father focused solely on his son's recovery, while the machinery of Reed Donovan's destruction activated around him. "Ready to go home?" he asked as Aiden carefully transferred from the wheelchair to the passenger seat of Mason's truck. "More than ready," Aiden confirmed. "If I never see another hospital room, it'll be too soon." As they drove, Mason received a text from Frank. "Meeting in progress. Target providing documents as anticipated." Everything was proceeding according to plan. The final trap was being sprung as he and Aiden made their way home through Denver's midday traffic. At the house, Mason helped Aiden settle into the living room with his medication and a light meal, ensuring he was comfortable before stepping into his home office to receive Frank's update. "Janice got everything," Frank reported via secure call. "Complete structural documentation with falsified engineering certifications, modified inspection reports, the works." Donovan practically handed her a confession, explaining how they expedited the approval process through creative compliance solutions. And Chen's team, moving now. They're executing a regulatory freeze on all Westridge assets and accounts. Melissa's story goes live within the hour. Mason nodded, satisfaction coursing through him. "What about Lindsay? Any contact with Donovan since last night?" "None that we've detected. She spent the morning with her attorney, presumably preparing the affidavit you requested." No warning calls to Donovan, no suspicious activity. This was mildly surprising, but ultimately irrelevant to the plan's execution. Lindsay's cooperation or betrayal would neither accelerate nor impede the carefully constructed sequence now in motion. Keep me updated on any developments, Mason instructed before ending the call. Returning to the living room, he found Aiden scrolling through his phone with a troubled expression. "Everything okay, buddy?" Aiden looked up, his brow furrowed. "There's something happening with Mom's boyfriend's company. It's all over my social feeds. Some kind of fraud investigation." Mason kept his expression neutral. "Is that so? What are they saying?" "That the Westridge development has major structural problems that were covered up, and now the government is shutting it down." Aiden studied his father's face. "Did you know about this?" Mason considered how to respond, balancing honesty against burdening his son with the complexities of adult retribution. "I was aware there were issues with the development. It's connected to some of the business challenges we've been having." "Is this why you and Mom have been fighting more? Because of her boyfriend's company?" "It's more complicated than that," Mason said carefully. "But yes, Reed's business practices have been a source of conflict." Aiden processed this information, his expression revealing the insight beyond his years that had always characterized him. "You did this, didn't you? You found evidence of what he was doing wrong." It wasn't a question, but a statement of recognition. Mason didn't deny it. Sometimes justice requires initiative when official channels are slow to act. Aiden nodded slowly. "Good. After everything they did, they deserved it." The simple statement, delivered without malice, but with clear moral certainty, confirmed what Mason had always believed about his son's character. A fundamental sense of fairness combined with the courage to acknowledge hard truths. Mason's phone rang. Gregory Santos calling with the latest developments. "It's happening faster than we anticipated," his attorney reported. The Division of Securities executed their regulatory action, and the district attorney's office has already picked it up. They're seeking arrest warrants based on the evidence package Chen's team provided. And the media coverage? Explosive. Melissa's piece is comprehensive, links the structural fraud to potential public safety hazards, highlights the investor deception, names names. It's being picked up by national outlets. "What about Reed's reaction?" "That's where it gets interesting," Gregory said, a note of surprise in his voice. "According to our sources, when the regulators arrived at Westridge, Donovan attempted to blame everything on his project manager and engineers. Then he tried to destroy documentation on his computer before they could secure it. That panicked response essentially confirmed their suspicions. And now, he's been brought in for questioning. No formal charges yet, but they're imminent. His attorney is scrambling, but the evidence is overwhelming." Mason absorbed this information with cold satisfaction. Reed Donovan's instinct for self-preservation had accelerated his downfall, exactly as Mason had predicted when crafting this phase of the plan. "Keep me informed of any significant developments," Mason instructed before ending the call. The afternoon unfolded with a surreal duality. The quiet domestic routine of helping Aiden with his medication and settling him in for rest, juxtaposed against the steady stream of updates documenting Reed Donovan's spectacular professional implosion. By evening, the full scope of the Westridge fraud had become the lead story across local media. The Denver Business Journal's exclusive had expanded to include details about improper permit acquisitions, zone violations, and most damning of all, deliberate concealment of structural defects that posed potential public safety hazards. Reed Donovan had been formally arrested, charged with multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and document falsification. His company's assets were frozen, projects suspended, and investors were initiating a class action lawsuit to recover their investments. In the midst of this controlled chaos, Lindsay called Mason directly, the first time she had done so since their hospital cafeteria meeting. "Did you orchestrate all of this?" she asked without preamble when he answered. "All of what?" Mason replied, his tone innocently curious. "Don't play games, Mason. Reed's arrest, the fraud charges, the media exposure. It's too coordinated, too comprehensive to be coincidence." "The authorities are simply doing their jobs," Mason said. Evidence of wrongdoing was presented, and they acted accordingly. Lindsay was silent for a moment. "The investor," Alexanderite. He doesn't exist, does he? Mason neither confirmed nor denied, allowing the implication to hang between them. I underestimated you, Lindsay finally said, her voice holding a complex mixture of emotions. Respect, fear, perhaps even a hint of admiration. I always thought you were too straight-laced, too by-the-book to do something like this. People reveal their true capabilities when protecting what matters to them. Mason replied simply. Have you completed the affidavit? The abrupt change of subject caught her off guard. Yes, my attorney has it ready. I've documented everything. The information I shared about your business, Reed's methods, all of it. Good. The authorities will be interested in that information as they build their case. Your cooperation now won't erase your actions, but it might partially mitigate them. Is that why you wanted it? To give to the authorities? Among other reasons, Mason acknowledged. How does it feel to be on the receiving end of betrayal, Lindsay? To discover the person you trusted was using you for their own gain? The question landed, striking at the heart of her recent disillusionment with Reed. It feels exactly as terrible as you intended it to, she admitted quietly. I deserve that. But Aiden doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of our ugliness. How is he doing after the hospital? Recovering well. He's seen the news about Reed. And he understands more than you might expect about the connection between personal choices and consequences. Lindsay sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. I've lost him, haven't I? Not legally, but in all the ways that matter. That depends entirely on your actions moving forward, Mason replied, offering neither comfort nor condemnation. Aiden has a remarkable capacity for forgiveness, but he requires authenticity. Empty gestures and convenient timing won't rebuild what's been broken. I want to try, Lindsay said. Not for custody or legal advantage, just to have some relationship with my son, whatever form that takes. Then prove it through consistent action over time, Mason advised. Beginning with delivering that affidavit and cooperating fully with the authorities investigating Reed's operations. After ending the call, Mason checked on Aiden, finding him asleep in his room, peaceful despite the day's medical and emotional challenges. Standing in the doorway, Mason reflected on the events he had set in motion and their far-reaching consequences. Reed Donovan's destruction was unfolding even more comprehensively than he had planned. The man who had contributed to the near destruction of his family was now experiencing his own systematic dismantling. Professional, legal, financial, and soon, personal, as Elise Hammond Donovan's high-powered attorneys would undoubtedly initiate divorce proceedings to protect her family's assets from the coming legal judgments. Lindsay's position was more complex. Her apparent remorse and willingness to cooperate suggested genuine recognition of her mistakes, but Mason harbored no illusions about reconciliation. Too much damage had been done, too many fundamental betrayals committed. The best outcome now was a functional co-parenting relationship focused exclusively on Aiden's well-being. As for Mason himself, the execution of this meticulously planned revenge had provided a certain cold satisfaction, but not the emotional resolution he might have expected. The true victory wasn't in Reed's downfall or Lindsay's regret, but in the preservation of what mattered most. His son's future and their relationship, strengthened rather than broken by the crucible they had endured together. His phone vibrated with a final update from Frank. Target transferred to detention center. Bail hearing tomorrow. Preliminary evidence suggests financial entanglements extend beyond Westridge. Possible pattern of similar fraud across multiple developments. This was an unexpected bonus. The investigation was already expanding beyond the specific fraud Mason had documented, suggesting Reed's criminal behavior was more extensive than initially suspected. The house of cards was collapsing completely, each fallen element revealing new deceptions beneath. Mason sent a brief reply. Monitor developments. Forward any relevant documentation to Chen's team. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping Aiden readjust to home life after his hospital stay, managing the business implications of Reed's downfall, preparing for the eventual legal proceedings where Mason's role in exposing the fraud might come under scrutiny. But tonight, watching his son sleep peacefully after months of medical uncertainty and emotional turmoil, Mason allowed himself a moment of genuine peace. The architects of his family's pain were facing justice, one through legal consequences, the other through the painful recognition of her own moral failures. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was justice, comprehensive and inescapable, just as he had promised while sitting beside Aiden's hospital bed all those weeks ago. Chapter 7. Ripple Effects. The collapse of Reed Donovan's empire sent shockwaves through Denver's business community with an intensity that exceeded even Mason's careful calculations. What began as an investigation into Westridge's structural fraud rapidly expanded into a comprehensive audit of all Donovan development projects over the past 5 years. Each day brought new revelations. Falsified environmental impact reports on the Riverfront Plaza, bribed inspectors at the Highlands Complex, embezzled investor funds for the Parkside Towers. The pattern of fraud and deception was so extensive that the State Attorney General's office established a special task force dedicated solely to the Donovan investigations. 3 weeks after Reed's arrest, Mason sat in Gregory Santos's office reviewing the latest developments. The DA is offering a plea deal, Gregory reported. 15 years with possibility of parole after 7. In exchange for full cooperation, identifying all co-conspirators and returning what remains of the investor funds. Will he take it? Mason asked. Gregory shrugged. His attorney is advising him to, but Reed still believes he can somehow talk his way out of this. The narcissism is remarkable. Even with mountains of evidence, he thinks he's the smartest person in any room. That arrogance contributed to his downfall, Mason observed. He never considered that someone might outmaneuver him at his own game. Speaking of which, Gregory said carefully, the investigators have been asking questions about Alexander, Wright, and Zenith Investments. They've obviously discovered the identity was fabricated, but they haven't connected it to you yet. Mason nodded, having anticipated this development. The shell company is solid, and any attempt to trace it will lead through 3 layers of legal ownership before reaching a dead end. Unless someone directly involved talks, there's no evidence linking me to Wright. And Calvin? Janice? The others involved in the operation? All compensated well for their discretion and protected by attorney-client privilege in your case, Mason assured him. The authorities' focus is on Reed's crimes, not how they were exposed. The evidence speaks for itself, regardless of how it was obtained. Gregory didn't seem entirely convinced. Just be prepared for possible questioning. If they do make the connection, we'll argue you were conducting legitimate due diligence after discovering potential fraud that impacted your business interests. A reasonable explanation supported by documented corporate espionage against Blackwood Construction, Mason agreed. But it won't come to that. As Mason left the attorney's office, he received a text from Aiden. Mom stopped by school. Wanted to talk. Told her I wasn't ready. Mason frowned at the message. Lindsay had been maintaining a respectful distance since delivering her detailed affidavit about Reed's business practices and her role in sharing Blackwood Construction information. This unannounced school visit represented a departure from the careful boundaries that had been established. You okay? He texted back. Yeah. She didn't push. Just said she's there when I'm ready. Your choice, your timeline, Mason assured him. No pressure either way. Arriving home, Mason found Aiden in his music studio, working on a composition that had become his primary therapy project during recovery, a complex, emotionally resonant piece that traced his journey from accident to healing. How was PT today? Mason asked, leaning against the doorframe. Aiden looked up from his keyboard. Good. Dr. Miguel says my fine motor control is almost back to normal. He demonstrated by playing a rapid, intricate sequence with his previously weaker left hand. Still some hesitation, but getting better. That's incredible progress, Mason said, genuine pride evident in his voice. Any word from the school counselor about your return schedule? She thinks I can start with half days next week, then build up to full days by the end of the month. Aiden saved his work and swiveled his chair to face his father. Did you see the news about Reed's wife? Mason shook his head. What happened? It's all over social media. She's filed for divorce and is cooperating with prosecutors. Apparently, she had no idea about the fraud stuff, but figured it out right before everything exploded. She's claiming whistleblower status or something. This was interesting development. Mason made a mental note to have Frank verify the details, suspecting Elise Hammond Donovan was strategically positioning herself to protect her family's assets and reputation from Reed's impending legal judgments. Smart move on her part, Mason commented. Distance herself from his actions while appearing cooperative with authorities. Aiden studied his father's face with that perceptive gaze that sometimes made Mason feel transparent. You're not surprised by any of this, are you? It's like you already knew how everything would play out. Mason chose his words carefully. I anticipated certain responses based on what I knew about the individuals involved. People tend to be predictable when their self-interest is threatened. Like Mom, Aiden asked quietly, was her showing up at school today predictable too? In a way, Mason acknowledged. Your mother is realizing what she's lost. That recognition typically triggers attempts to reclaim or repair, especially as the consequences of her choices become more evident. Aiden considered this with remarkable maturity. Do you think she's really sorry? Or just sorry she got caught up in Reed's mess? Probably both, Mason answered honestly. People are complicated. Genuine remorse and self-preservation often coexist. Do you hate her? Aiden asked suddenly. For what she did during my accident and everything after? The directness of the question caught Mason momentarily off guard. No, he said after consideration. I don't hate her. I'm disappointed, angry at times, and I'll never fully trust her again. But hate requires sustained emotional investment that she doesn't deserve. Aiden nodded slowly. That's kind of how I feel too. I'm angry about her not being there when I needed her most, but she's still my mom. It's complicated. You're entitled to all those conflicting feelings, Mason assured him. And you get to decide what relationship you want with her moving forward on your terms and timeline. Later that evening, as Aiden worked on school assignments with his tutor, Mason received a call from Frank Weaver. You're going to want to see this, Frank said without preamble. Sending you a link now. The link led to a just-published Denver Business Journal article with the headline, Exclusive, Donovan Developments, a house of cards built on fraud, says former CFO. Reed's chief financial officer, Walter Simmons, had turned state's evidence, providing prosecutors with detailed documentation of systematic fraud across all Donovan projects dating back nearly a decade. The article contained damning quotes about Reed's business philosophy. Mr. Donovan operated on what he called flexible ethics, the belief that rules were merely suggestions that could be bent or broken as long as profits were maintained. He frequently stated that regulations are for people without imagination. More significantly, Simmons had confirmed the connection between Reed's relationship with Lindsay and his access to Blackwood Construction's confidential bid information. Donovan specifically pursued a relationship with Lindsay Blackwood to gain competitive intelligence on her husband's construction company. He boasted about how her access to Blackwood's proprietary bid strategies gave him an unbeatable edge in securing contracts that might otherwise have gone to Blackwood Construction. The article estimated that this corporate espionage had cost Mason's company approximately $12.8 million in lost contracts over the preceding 18 months. This confirms everything in Lindsay's affidavit, Frank noted when Mason called him back after reading the article. But coming from Donovan's CFO, it carries significantly more weight with prosecutors and in public opinion. Has Lindsay seen this? Mason asked. Almost certainly. It's spreading rapidly across industry channels and social media. Mason considered the implications. Monitor her movements and communications. This public confirmation of her role in the espionage will increase pressure on her. She might make impulsive decisions. Frank's prediction proved accurate. Less than 2 hours later, Lindsay appeared at their front door, visibly distressed and apparently having come directly from seeing the article. Mason stepped outside rather than inviting her in, closing the door behind him to prevent Aiden from overhearing the conversation. I assume you've seen the Business Journal piece, he said without preamble. Everyone has seen it, Lindsay replied, her composed facade cracking under stress. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. My broker has already suggested I take a leave of absence from the agency. My reputation is destroyed. Actions have consequences, Mason observed dispassionately. The article merely confirmed what your affidavit already acknowledged. This is different, Lindsay insisted. This is public humiliation. I'll never sell another property in this town. I'll be known forever as the woman who betrayed her husband and son for Reed Donovan. Mason studied her, noting the genuine distress beneath the self-pity. What do you want from me, Lindsay? Sympathy? Absolution? She began, then faltered. I don't know what I want. Protection, maybe. Advice on how to weather this. You've always been good at handling crises. This isn't my crisis to manage, Mason replied evenly. You made specific choices that led to these specific consequences. Now you're experiencing what Aiden and I felt when we discovered your betrayal. Exposed, vulnerable, abandoned by someone who should have protected you. Lindsay flinched at the comparison. I know I deserve this. I'm not asking you to fix it. I have nowhere else to go. No one else to talk to who understands the full situation. Something in her genuine desolation stirred a faint echo of the compassion Mason had once felt for her. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a basic human acknowledgement of suffering. Here's my advice, he said finally. First, contact Gregory Santos. He can recommend a crisis management specialist who handles reputation issues for public figures. Second, consider relocating temporarily, not running away, but creating space for the initial media frenzy to subside. Third, focus on demonstrating consistent remorse through actions, not words. Beginning with continued cooperation in the Donovan investigation. Lindsay absorbed his suggestions with visible relief at having some concrete direction. Thank you, she said quietly. I know you didn't have to help me at all. I'm not doing it for you, Mason clarified. I'm doing it for Aiden. Your public humiliation affects him too. The more gracefully you handle this situation, the less collateral damage to his social environment. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the front door opened and Aiden appeared, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and wariness at finding his mother on their doorstep. Mom? What are you doing here? Lindsay composed herself quickly, though the evidence of her distress remained visible. I just stopped by to talk to your father about some developments in the situation with Reed. Aiden's perceptiveness hadn't diminished during his recovery. You mean the article where Reed's CFO said he was only with you to get information about Dad's business? Both adults stared at him in surprise. What? Aiden shrugged. I have internet access. Everyone at school was talking about it in the group chat. Lindsay paled at the realization that her son had read the humiliating details of her manipulation by Reed. It's okay, Aiden interrupted, his tone surprisingly gentle. I already knew most of it from what Dad told me, and from what I overheard while I was in the coma. This confirmation that Aiden had indeed been aware during portions of his coma, including, potentially, Lindsay's callous message about his insurance money, visibly devastated her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears finally breaking through her careful composure. For everything. For not being there when you needed me most. For letting Reed become more important than you. There's no excuse. Aiden regarded her with an expression far older than his 16 years. Compassionate but undeceived. I know you're sorry now. But where were you then? When it actually mattered? The simple question contained all the hurt and disappointment he had carried during his long recovery. Lindsay had no adequate response. I think you should go, Aiden said quietly. I'm not ready to talk about all this yet. Maybe someday, but not today. Lindsay nodded, accepting her son's boundary with surprising grace. I understand. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be there. She glanced at Mason. Thank you for the advice. I'll contact Gregory tomorrow. After she departed, Aiden and Mason stood in silence for a moment. You gave her advice? Aiden finally asked, surprised. Professional guidance only, Mason clarified. How to manage the public relations aspect of the situation. Aiden considered this. That was kind of you. After everything she did. It wasn't for her benefit, Mason explained. Your mother's public humiliation affects you too. The better she handles this situation, the less you'll be impacted by the fallout. Still, Aiden insisted, Most people would have enjoyed watching her suffer. You try to help her, even a little. Mason realized his son was identifying something important, that in choosing limited compassion over vindictiveness, he had demonstrated a form of strength that revenge alone couldn't provide. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't the most destructive one, Mason acknowledged. There's a difference between justice and cruelty. Aiden nodded, seeming to absorb this distinction. Do you think she'll ever change? Really change, I mean. I don't know, Mason answered honestly. People can change when sufficiently motivated, but requires genuine introspection and sustained effort. We'll have to wait and see if her remorse translates into consistent action over time. That night, as Mason reviewed the day's developments, he recognized that the carefully orchestrated revenge against Reed Donovan had achieved its primary objectives. Reed faced imminent criminal conviction and financial ruin. His reputation was destroyed beyond rehabilitation. The fraud he had perpetrated was exposed in comprehensive detail. The collateral impact on Lindsay had been an inevitable consequence rather than Mason's primary objective, but it too served justice. Public accountability for her role in the betrayal and corporate espionage that had damaged Blackwood Construction. What Mason hadn't anticipated was the emotional complexity of the aftermath. The cold satisfaction of successful revenge was giving way to something more nuanced. Not forgiveness, but a tentative path toward resolution that acknowledged the human dimension of all involved, including himself. As Reed Donovan's empire continued to crumble under expanding investigations, Mason found his own focus shifting from retribution to reconstruction, rebuilding his company's position in the market, supporting Aiden's ongoing recovery, and considering what his own future might hold beyond the all-consuming pursuit of justice that had defined recent months. The quest for vengeance had served its purpose. Now it was time to determine what would rise from the ashes of betrayal. Chapter 8. Reckonings. 6 weeks after the Denver Business Journal expose, the full extent of Reed Donovan's criminal enterprise had been laid bare through a combination of whistleblower testimony, forensic accounting investigations, and regulatory scrutiny. The final tally was staggering. Over $42 million in investor funds misappropriated, at least 17 major building code violations deliberately concealed, and dozens of individuals implicated in various aspects of the fraud scheme. Reed himself had finally accepted the inevitable, agreeing to a plea deal that would send him to federal prison for 12 years. The terms required full financial restitution to investors and comprehensive cooperation, identifying all co-conspirators. His public statement, delivered through his attorney, offered no apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing, merely a technical admission of guilt to reduce his sentence. For Mason, this resolution brought professional validation but limited personal satisfaction. The man who had contributed to his family's near destruction would face significant consequences, yet Reed's continued refusal to acknowledge the human cost of his actions suggested he had learned nothing from his downfall. More complex was the evolving situation with Lindsay. Following Mason's advice, she had retained a crisis management specialist and temporarily relocated to her sister's home in Phoenix, removing herself from the immediate Denver media scrutiny. Her cooperation with prosecutors had been thorough and forthright, earning her immunity from criminal charges related to the corporate espionage in exchange for her testimony against Reed. The professional consequences, however, were devastating. Her real estate license had been suspended pending an ethics investigation, effectively ending her career in that field. Her social standing in the community had collapsed, former friends and colleagues distancing themselves as the details of her betrayal became public knowledge. Through it all, she had maintained respectful boundaries with Aiden, communicating primarily through brief, non-demanding texts and occasional cards, never pressuring him for forgiveness or reunion, simply expressing support for his recovery and willingness to connect on his terms when and if he was ready. This consistent respect for Aiden's boundaries represented the first genuine evidence that Lindsay might be capable of meaningful change, prioritizing her son's needs above her own emotional desires. Mason observed this development with cautious neutrality, neither encouraging reconciliation nor hindering it, allowing Aiden to navigate this complex relationship at his own pace. On a crisp October morning, nearly 8 months after Aiden's accident, Mason sat at his office at Blackwood Construction reviewing the company's remarkable recovery. The exposure of Donovan Development's fraudulent practices had created opportunities for reputable contractors to assume control of abandoned projects, and Blackwood's stellar reputation had positioned them to secure several of these contracts. The door opened, and Hector Martinez entered with a thumb drive and a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" Mason asked, immediately alert to his friend's unusual demeanor. "You need to see this," Hector said, inserting the drive into Mason's computer. "One of our suppliers forwarded it to me. It's being circulated among industry insiders." The file contained surveillance video from what appeared to be a hotel bar, dated approximately 2 weeks before Aiden's accident. The footage showed Reed Donovan in animated conversation with another man Mason recognized with a jolt of surprise. James Whitfield, the transportation department official who had overseen the highway maintenance project near the site of Aiden's collision. The audio was muffled, but clear enough to understand the essence of their discussion. Deliberate delays in scheduled guardrail replacements and safety upgrades on Highway 470 would create a bidding opportunity for a Donovan-affiliated construction company. Whitfield was heard assuring Reed that the stretch of highway wouldn't be addressed until next quarter's budget, despite internal reports classifying it as a high-priority safety concern. The same stretch of highway where, 2 weeks later, Aiden's car would be forced off the road by an erratic driver, crashing through the absent guardrail that should have been replaced months earlier. Mason stared at the screen, ice forming in his veins as the implications crystallized. Reed Donovan's corruption hadn't merely targeted his business. It had directly contributed to the circumstances of Aiden's near-fatal accident. "Where did this come from?" Mason asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "One of the whistleblowers from the transportation department released it anonymously," Hector explained. "They're saying there's more evidence connecting Whitfield to Donovan, a pattern of delayed safety projects that coincidentally benefited Donovan's companies." Mason's hands tightened into fists. The revenge he had orchestrated against Reed suddenly seemed inadequate in light of this revelation. 12 years in prison for financial crimes didn't begin to address the physical endangerment of countless drivers, including his son. "We need to verify this," Mason said, his mind already calculating the next moves. "And we need to do it quietly." Hector nodded, understanding immediately. "I'll contact our sources in the transportation department. If there are internal reports documenting the safety concerns and the delayed response, we'll find them." After Hector left, Mason sat motionless, processing this new information. The dismantling of Reed Donovan's empire had felt like justice served. Until now. This revelation transformed everything, elevating Reed's crimes for financial fraud to something approaching attempted manslaughter through criminal negligence. More disturbing was the timing. Had Reed known who used that stretch of highway regularly? Had he specifically targeted that section knowing Aiden's routine? The possibility that his son's life-altering injuries weren't simply bad luck, but the result of deliberate corruption cut deeper than any previous betrayal. Mason's phone rang, Frank Weaver calling with his own update on the video. "It's legitimate," Frank confirmed before Mason could ask. "I've authenticated the footage and identified 3 additional meetings between Donovan and Whitfield over the 6 months preceding Aiden's accident. They were careful, but not careful enough. I need everything," Mason instructed. "Every document, communication, connection between them. And I need to know who else was involved." "Already on it." "But Mason," Frank hesitated, concern evident in his voice. "This changes the game. If you take this public, it becomes much bigger than Reed Donovan's financial crimes. You'll be challenging systemic corruption in state infrastructure contracts." "Good," Mason replied, cold determination sharpening his voice. "Let the system burn if it's this rotten." After ending the call, Mason walked to the window of his office, staring out at the Denver skyline. The city he had helped build through honest construction work now appeared differently. A landscape of potential corruption and endangerment hiding behind gleaming glass facades. His phone buzzed with a text from Aiden. Got cleared for full school days starting Monday. PT says I'm at 92% function now. The message, a celebration of his son's continued recovery, crystallized Mason's resolve. Aiden had fought back from the brink of death, endured months of painful rehabilitation, and rebuilt his life step by painful step. Meanwhile, the men responsible for creating the dangerous conditions that cause his injuries had expected to escape accountability entirely. That ends now, Mason decided. Justice for Aiden would be complete, regardless of who stood in the way. Later that evening, as Mason and Aiden shared dinner, Mason debated whether to share the new information with his son. Aiden had made remarkable progress, both physically and emotionally, but learning that his accident might have been preventable could reopen healing wounds. "You're distracted," Aiden observed, his perceptiveness undiminished by his injuries. "Something happened at work?" Mason considered deflecting, but opted for a partial truth. Some new information emerged about Reed Donovan's activities. "It's significant." Aiden set down his fork. "Significant how?" "It appears his corruption extended beyond financial fraud. He was involved in manipulating highway safety projects for profit." Understanding dawned in Aiden's eyes. "Highway safety, like where my accident happened?" Mason nodded, deciding his son deserved the truth. "There's evidence suggesting the guardrail that should have been there was deliberately delayed to create contract opportunities for Donovan's companies." Aiden absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though his hands trembled slightly. "So my accident, everything I went through, it might have been prevented if they'd done their jobs properly." "The evidence points that way," Mason confirmed. "I'm having it thoroughly verified before taking action." "What kind of action?" Aiden asked, studying his father's face. "Justice," Mason replied simply, "beyond what Reed is already facing for the financial crimes." Aiden was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. All those months in hospital, the pain, the therapy, because someone decided profit was more important than people's safety. Mason reached across the table, placing his hand over his son's. "I promise you, they'll answer for it. All of them." "I want to help," Aiden said, surprising Mason with the conviction in his voice. "Not just by giving testimony or statements. I want to be involved in making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The determination in Aiden's expression reflected Mason's own, the same unflinching resolve in the face of injustice. In that moment, Mason saw not just his son, but a young man coming into his own moral authority, transformed by his experiences into someone with both the clarity to recognize wrong and the courage to confront it. "We'll do it together," Mason agreed. As a team, the following week marked a turning point in both the Donovan investigation and in Aiden's recovery. As Aiden returned to full-time school attendance for the first time since his accident, Mason worked with Frank and a select team to compile comprehensive documentation of the highway safety corruption scheme. The evidence they gathered was damning. Internal emails showing Whitfield repeatedly overriding safety engineers' urgent recommendations. Financial records revealing indirect payments from Donovan-affiliated companies to Whitfield's offshore account, and testimony from department whistleblowers describing a systematic pattern of delayed safety projects that created lucrative emergency repair contracts. Most disturbing were the accident statistics. 17 serious crashes had occurred on the compromised stretch of Highway 470 in the 8 months since the safety upgrades had been initially scheduled and subsequently delayed, crashes that likely would have been prevented by the mandated guardrail replacements and signage improvements. Aiden's accident had been just one among many, though among the most severe. The human cost of this corruption extended far beyond their family, affecting dozens of injured motorists and their loved ones. With the documentation complete, Mason faced a crucial decision: how to ensure this evidence resulted in actual accountability rather than bureaucratic obfuscation. The straightforward approach, turning everything over to the authorities, carried the risk of internal suppression, particularly given Whitfield's connections within the Transportation Department and state government. After careful consideration, Mason developed a three-pronged strategy that would make containment impossible: simultaneous submission of evidence to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI's Public Corruption Division, and a carefully selected investigative journalist with a national platform. Melissa Oakes, who had broken the initial Westridge fraud story, was the natural choice for the media component. Her reputation for thorough documentation and fearless reporting had only grown since that expose. "This goes deeper than I imagined," Melissa said when Mason presented the evidence during a secure meeting at his attorney's office. "We're talking about systemic corruption that directly endangered public safety. That's exactly why it needs to be exposed comprehensively," Mason replied. "Not just Reed Donovan and James Whitfield, but everyone involved in this scheme." "You understand what you're doing," Melissa said, studying him carefully. "This will implicate high-level officials beyond the Transportation Department. There will be significant pushback." "I'm counting on it," Mason acknowledged. "The higher the pushback, the clearer the corruption. That's why we're approaching this from multiple angles simultaneously." As they finalized the strategy, Mason received an unexpected call from Gregory Santos. "Reed Donovan is requesting a meeting with you before his sentencing next week. Says he has information you would consider valuable." "Did he specify what information?" "No, but he was insistent. Said it concerns matters beyond the current charges that would be of personal interest to you." Mason considered the request with wary interest. He's desperate for leverage to reduce his sentence, but he might actually have something worth hearing. "Want me to arrange it?" Gregory asked. "Yes. Secure location, recorded, with you present." 2 days later, Mason entered a private conference room at Gregory's law firm where Reed Donovan waited, the orange jumpsuit of pretrial detention replacing his customary tailored suits. 8 months of incarceration had aged him visibly, his formerly confident posture now hunched, his polished appearance dulled by institutional living. "Mason," Reed greeted him with a strained attempt at collegiality. "Thank you for coming. I know we have our differences." "Skip the pleasantries," Mason interrupted coldly. "What information do you have?" Reed's facade of friendliness evaporated. Direct as always. "Fine. I know about your investigation into the Highway 470 safety delays. I know you've connected me to Whitfield and the Transportation Department contracts." Mason kept his expression neutral despite his surprise at Reed's awareness. And I can give you everyone involved. Names, dates, specific projects, payment arrangements. The entire network from department officials to contractors to politicians who protected the operation. In exchange for what? Mason asked, though the answer was obvious. "A letter to the judge recommending leniency at my sentencing. I'm looking at 12 years, Mason. With your support, I might get down to 8, maybe less with good behavior." Mason studied the man who had helped destroy his family and endanger his son's life. "Why would I help reduce your sentence when I know about your role in delaying the guardrail replacements on the highway where Aiden was injured?" Reed's expression flickered with genuine surprise. "Wait, you think?" He stopped, reassessing his approach. "Mason, I had nothing to do with the specific delay on that section of Highway 470. That was entirely Whitfield's decision. A decision that financially benefited your affiliated companies," Mason countered. "For emergency repairs after accidents, yes," Reed acknowledged. "But I never targeted that stretch knowing Aiden used it. That wasn't part of the calculation." The denial rang hollow to Mason's ears. "You expect me to believe that's just coincidence? The exact section of highway my son regularly traveled happened to be the one with delayed safety upgrades that benefited your companies." "It was one of 17 delayed projects that quarter," Reed insisted. "Whitfield chose them based on budget considerations and political factors. I profited from a system, yes, but I never directed which specific sections were delayed." Mason leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let me be perfectly clear. I will not help reduce your sentence. Not by a single day. But I will make you an offer. Give me everything you have on everyone involved in this scheme, and I won't actively push for additional charges related to the highway, safety corruption." Reed's expression hardened with the realization that he held no leverage. "You've already got most of it, don't you? This meeting is just to see if I'll corroborate what you found." "Smart man," Mason acknowledged without emotion. "So what's it going to be? Cooperation with no benefits except the knowledge you did one decent thing in your miserable life, or obstruction that ensures we pursue every possible additional charge. The standoff lasted several silent seconds before Reed's shoulders slumped in defeat. I'll give you everything. Not for leniency, that's clearly off the table, but because Lindsay asked me to. At Mason's surprised expression, Reed added, "She visited me last week." Said cooperating fully was the only way to begin making amends for the damage we caused. This unexpected revelation suggested Lindsay's apparent transformation might be more genuine than Mason had assumed. "Start talking," he instructed Reed. "Names, connections, documentation, locations. Everything." For the next 2 hours, Reed Donovan detailed the intricate corruption network he had helped build. A system involving transportation officials, contractors, inspection personnel, and several state-level politicians who had protected the operation in exchange for campaign contributions and personal benefits. The information largely confirmed what Mason's investigation had already uncovered, but added crucial details about document locations, offshore accounts, and specific individuals who had helped conceal the scheme. Most valuable was Reed's confirmation that the corruption extended to the highest levels of the state's transportation administration. Information that would prevent the investigation from being contained to lower-level officials like Whitfield. As the session concluded, Reed made one final statement. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt, especially not Aiden. That might mean nothing to you, but it's the truth." "You're right," Mason replied, standing to leave. "It means nothing. When you prioritize profit over safety, people get hurt. That's not an accident. It's an inevitable consequence of your choices." As Mason departed with Gregory, the attorney commented, "He gave us more than I expected. Think he's genuinely remorseful?" "No," Mason said firmly. "He's calculating the best approach to minimize further damage. If he felt genuine remorse, he would have come forward voluntarily months ago, not waited until he had no other options." The following day, Mason and Aiden met with Melissa Oakes to review the completed investigative piece before its publication. Mason had insisted on Aiden's inclusion, recognizing his son's right to participate in exposing the corruption that had so dramatically altered his life. "It's comprehensive," Melissa assured them, pulling up the final draft on her laptop. "We've connected every dot from the delayed safety projects to the specific accidents that resulted, including Aiden's. The financial trails linking Donovan's companies to the emergency repairs are irrefutable." Aiden reviewed the article with remarkable composure, pausing at the section detailing his own accident and the medical consequences he had endured. "You included the statistics for all the crashes on that stretch," he noted with approval. "Not just mine. Your father insisted on that," Melissa explained. "He was adamant that this story isn't just about what happened to you, but about all the people affected by these delays." "Because it's not just about us," Aiden agreed, looking at his father with understanding. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Mason nodded, pride in his son overshadowing the anger that had driven this investigation. "When does this publish?" "Tomorrow morning, synchronized with your evidence submissions to the Attorney General and FBI," Melissa confirmed. "Once it's public, containment becomes impossible." That evening, as Mason and Aiden prepared for the storm their actions would unleash the following day, Mason received a call from Lindsay. "Reed told me about your meeting," she said without preamble. "About the highway safety corruption and Aiden's accident. Did you know?" Mason asked, the question that had haunted him since discovering the connection. "No," Lindsay answered firmly. "Not about the highway projects. I knew Reed had government contracts and political connections, but not the specifics of how he obtained them. Certainly not that they involved compromising safety measures." Mason believed her. The shock and horror in her voice when discussing Aiden's accident had always seemed genuine, inconsistent with prior knowledge of its preventable nature. "The story breaks tomorrow," he informed her. "It will implicate dozens of officials and contractors. Reed's involvement will receive additional scrutiny beyond his current charges." "I understand," Lindsay said quietly. "I encouraged him to cooperate fully. It won't make up for anything, but it's the right thing to do." "Why now?" Mason asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his usual emotional distance. "Why push Reed to cooperate when it offers him no benefit?" Lindsay was silent for a moment. Because I'm trying to become someone Aiden might eventually respect again. Someone who chooses right over expedient, even when it's difficult. The simple honesty of her response suggested a genuine internal shift rather than a calculated performance. That's a long road, Mason observed, neither encouraging nor dismissing her efforts. I know, Lindsay acknowledged. I don't expect forgiveness or even reconciliation. I just want to stop adding to the damage I've caused. After a thoughtful pause, Mason said, Aiden returns to full-time school on Monday. He's been working on a music composition about his recovery journey. The school's hosting a small performance next Friday evening. The implication was clear. Mason was sharing information about an event important to Aiden, something Lindsay would not have known otherwise. Thank you for telling me, Lindsay said, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. Do you think, would it be appropriate for me to attend? That's Aiden's decision, not mine, Mason replied. I'll let him know you're interested and leave it to him. When Mason relayed the conversation to Aiden, his son considered the question of Lindsay's attendance with thoughtful maturity. I think I'm ready to see her in a public setting, he decided. Not one-on-one yet, but at the performance, that might be okay. Mason nodded, respecting his son's boundaries while acknowledging his willingness to take a small step toward potential reconciliation. I'll let her know she's welcome to attend if you're comfortable with that. The following morning, the coordinated revelation of the highway safety corruption scheme detonated across Colorado with the force of a precision bomb. Melissa's investigative piece, published simultaneously with Mason's evidence submissions to authorities, exposed the entire network of corruption in devastating detail. By noon, the governor had announced an emergency review of all state transportation contracts and safety protocols. By evening, James Whitfield and 3 other senior transportation officials had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Within days, the scandal had expanded to include 2 state senators and a prominent lobbyist who had facilitated the corrupt arrangements. Reed Donovan, already facing sentencing for his financial crimes, now confronted potential additional charges related to the safety corruption, charges that could add years to his prison term despite his eventual cooperation. For Mason, the systematic exposure of this corruption represented justice served beyond his original vengeance against Reed and Lindsay. This wasn't merely personal retribution, but a public service that would potentially save lives by reforming a dangerously compromised system. More important was Aiden's response to these developments. Rather than being re-traumatized by the public discussion of his accident, he had found purpose in advocating for transportation safety reforms, even agreeing to a carefully managed interview where he described his recovery journey and the importance of infrastructure safety standards. You've handled all this with remarkable strength, Mason told his son as they drove home from the interview. Most people would be overwhelmed by these revelations. Aiden considered this. I think maybe the accident changed how I see things. When you've had to relearn how to walk and talk, other challenges seem less intimidating. After a thoughtful pause, he added, and I had a good example to follow. The simple acknowledgement warmed Mason more than any professional achievement or successful revenge strategy ever could. You're going to surpass that example, he said with certainty. You already are in many ways. 1 week later, Aiden performed his composition, titled Waking, at the school auditorium. The piece moved from discordant chaos representing the accident, through struggling minor progressions echoing his rehabilitation journey, to a resolute, hopeful conclusion that brought tears to many listeners' eyes. Mason watched from the front row, pride overwhelming all other emotions as his son's musical talent and personal journey merged into something beautiful and profound. At the back of the auditorium stood Lindsay, maintaining a respectful distance while witnessing this milestone in her son's recovery. After the performance, as audience members congratulated Aiden, Mason observed his son glance toward his mother, hesitate briefly, then make his way through the crowd to where she stood. Their interaction was brief, a few exchanged words, a hesitant half-embrace, but it represented a critical first step toward a new kind of relationship built on Aiden's terms rather than Lindsay's expectations or Mason's influence. When Aiden returned to his father's side, His expression showed the complex mixture of emotions such a reunion would naturally evoke. She said she was proud of me. He reported simply. She should be. Mason agreed. We both are. Later that night, as Mason reflected on the events of recent months, from the devastating betrayal that began their ordeal to the systematic justice that had followed, he recognized that the most meaningful victory wasn't the destruction of Reed Donovan's empire or the exposure of corruption, but the resilience his son had developed through these challenges. Aiden had emerged from trauma, not diminished but strengthened, not embittered but resolute in his commitment to positive change. That transformation represented a triumph no act of revenge could match, a reminder that the ultimate purpose of justice isn't punishment but restoration. For Mason himself, the single-minded focus on retribution had served its purpose and now gave way to more constructive priorities, rebuilding his company's position in a reformed industry landscape, supporting Aiden's continued development, and perhaps even reclaiming aspects of his own life that had been sacrificed to the all-consuming pursuit of vengeance. The architects of betrayal had been held accountable. Justice had been served, both personal and public. Now it was time to build something new from the hard-won wisdom these trials had provided. Chapter 9. Foundations. 1 year after Aiden's accident, the Blackwood home buzzed with activity as Mason and his son prepared for an unusual gathering. The spacious backyard had been transformed with tables, chairs, and subtle decorations, not for a celebration in the traditional sense, but for what Aiden had termed a recovery commemoration. Are you sure about the guest list? Mason asked as they arranged seating. It's an eclectic group. Aiden nodded confidently. Everyone here played a role in what happened, good or bad. It feels right to mark the anniversary with all of them present. The guest list reflected Aiden's unique perspective on their journey. Dr. Winters and the medical team who had saved his life. Hector and key staff from Blackwood Construction who had supported Mason throughout the crisis. Frank Weaver and the investigators who had helped expose the truth. Several fellow accident survivors from the compromised highway section. And, most surprisingly, Lindsay. Not Reed, though. Aiden had specified when planning the event. I'm not ready for that, and I don't think I'll ever be. Reed Donovan remained in federal prison, now serving a consolidated 18-year sentence for both the financial fraud and his role in the highway safety corruption. His cooperation had prevented a life sentence, but ensured he would remain incarcerated well into his 60s. The highway safety scandal had ultimately implicated 27 individuals across government agencies, contracting companies, and political offices. The systemic reforms implemented in its wake had become a national model for infrastructure oversight and transparency, a silver lining to the dark cloud of corruption that had endangered so many lives. As guests began to arrive, Mason observed the ease with which Aiden greeted each person, his social confidence fully restored after months of careful reintegration into school and community activities. His physical recovery had plateaued at approximately 95% of his pre-accident capabilities, a remarkable outcome given the severity of his initial injuries, though certain subtle deficits remained. More impressive was his psychological resilience. Where many trauma survivors might have developed bitterness or anxiety, Aiden had channeled his experience into purpose, founding a student advocacy group for infrastructure safety and developing his musical compositions into a suite that had won national recognition in a young composers competition. Dr. Winters arrived with several members of the ICU team, embracing Aiden warmly. 1 year, the neurologist marveled. From Coma to concert performances, you've rewritten what we tell families about recovery potential. I had exceptional care, Aiden replied graciously, and a father who never gave up. Lindsay arrived last, hanging back slightly as if uncertain of her welcome despite the explicit invitation. The past year had transformed her as well, though in different ways. Having lost her real estate career and social standing, she had rebuilt her life around more substantive priorities, volunteering with brain injury support groups, taking courses in social work, and maintaining appropriate, consistent contact with Aiden on his terms. The relationship between mother and son remained cautiously developing. Not the easy closeness of before, but not the complete estrangement that might have resulted from her actions during his hospitalization. They had established a careful rhythm of supervised visits and shared activities that acknowledged both the damage done and the possibility of a new, different connection. Mason and Lindsay maintained strictly co-parental communication, their interactions focused exclusively on Aiden's needs and well-being. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, the settlement reflecting Mason's commitment to justice rather than vengeance. Fair, but not punitive, allowing Lindsay sufficient resources to rebuild her life independently. As the gathering settled into conversations over the catered lunch, Aiden clinked his glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his speech patterns now showing only the slightest hesitation under emotional stress. "This isn't exactly a celebration. What happened was tragic in many ways. But it is a recognition of survival, recovery, and change." He looked around at the assembled guests. "Each of you played a role in my journey, saving my life, supporting my recovery, exposing the truth about why the accident happened, or simply understanding what it's like to go through something like this." Mason watched with pride as his son continued addressing the group with poise and thoughtfulness beyond his years. The trauma that might have broken a lesser spirit had instead revealed Aiden's fundamental strength. Not an absence of struggle, but a capacity to incorporate difficulty into a more complex and compassionate worldview. "I've learned that recovery isn't about getting back to exactly who you were before," Aiden explained. "It's about building something new that includes both who you were and what you've experienced. I'm not the same person I was before the accident, and that's okay. I've gained perspective I wouldn't trade, even though the cost was high." The simple wisdom of this observation resonated powerfully with the medical professionals and fellow survivors present, several nodding in recognition of this rarely articulated truth about trauma recovery. "I've also learned about justice," Aiden continued, glancing briefly toward his father. "Not revenge or punishment, but true justice that prevents further harm and creates meaningful change. The safety reforms implemented after the investigation will protect countless drivers who will never know they were in danger. That matters more than any personal retribution could." As Aiden concluded his remarks, Mason recognized how profoundly his own understanding of justice had evolved throughout this journey. What had begun as a ruthless quest for revenge against those who had betrayed his family had transformed into something more meaningful. Systemic reform that extended far beyond personal vindication. The gathering continued into the afternoon, conversations flowing naturally among people connected by their roles in an extraordinary year of crisis, revelation, and recovery. Mason observed Lindsay having a thoughtful conversation with Dr. Winters about brain injury support resources, her genuine interest in understanding Aiden's journey evident in her engaged questions. "She's really changed, hasn't she?" Hector commented, following Mason's gaze. "In some ways," Mason acknowledged. "Time will tell if it's permanent." "And you?" Hector asked. "Have you found what you needed in all this?" Mason considered the question carefully. "Not what I expected to find," he admitted. "When this started, I wanted them to suffer as we had suffered. I wanted to destroy everything they valued, just as they had nearly destroyed what I valued most. And now I understand that true justice isn't about equivalent suffering, but about right restoration," Mason replied. "Reed Donovan isn't in prison because I wanted revenge, but because his actions endangered lives and violated laws. The system is being reformed not to satisfy my anger, but to protect future families from what we experienced." Hector nodded thoughtfully. "Your focus shifted from punishment to prevention." "Exactly. And that feels more complete somehow, more meaningful than personal vengeance alone could have been." As evening approached and guests began to depart, Mason found himself momentarily alone with Lindsay as Aiden said goodbye to the medical team. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of today," she said quietly. "It means more than I can express." Mason nodded, maintaining the emotional distance that now defined their interaction while acknowledging the significance of her inclusion. It was Aiden's decision. He's finding his own way through this. He's remarkable, Lindsay said, genuine pride evident in her voice. And that's largely due to you. Your support, your strength, your example. He would have found his way regardless, Mason replied. That resilience is intrinsic to who he is. Lindsay seemed to hesitate before speaking again. I know we'll never be friends, Mason. Too much has happened between us. But I hope we can continue to build a functional relationship for Aiden's sake. As long as you maintain appropriate boundaries and consistent support, that's possible. Mason agreed, his tone neutral but not hostile. His well-being remains the priority for both of us. Absolutely, Lindsay confirmed. Always. As she departed, Mason reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point, from betrayal and near tragedy to a cautious, structured co-parenting arrangement focused solely on their son's needs. Not forgiveness or reconciliation, but a practical path forward that acknowledged both the permanent damage done and the necessity of continued connection through their shared commitment to Aiden. Later that evening, as Mason and Aiden cleaned up after the gathering, his son broke their companionable silence with an unexpected question. Are you still angry about everything that happened? Mason considered the question carefully. Not in the same way, he answered honestly. The intensity has faded. I still believe everyone involved deserved the consequences they received, but I don't need to actively fuel that fire anymore. Aiden nodded, seeming to understand this nuanced distinction. I feel the same way about Mom. I'm not ready to fully trust her again. Maybe I never will be, but I don't need to hold on to the anger about her not being there when I was in the coma. It just takes too much energy. That's wisdom beyond your years, Mason observed. Releasing anger isn't the same as forgetting or excusing what happened. It's just choosing not to let it continue controlling your life. I had a good teacher, Aiden said with a small smile. As they finished putting away the last of the serving platters, Aiden mentioned casually, I got an email from Berklee College of Music today about my composition portfolio. Mason looked up, immediately alert to the significance. Berklee had been Aiden's dream school for years, its prestigious music program a perfect fit for his talents. And they're offering early admission and a partial scholarship, Aiden revealed, excitement breaking through his attempted nonchalance. They specifically mentioned Waking as showing exceptional emotional maturity and technical sophistication. That's incredible, Mason exclaimed, genuine joy surging through him. Though I'm not surprised. Your work deserves that recognition. It's still 2 years away, Aiden noted, referencing his current junior year status. But knowing I have a place there, after everything that happened, it feels like proof that the accident didn't define my future. It influenced your path, but never limited it, Mason agreed. If anything, your compositions have gained depth and authenticity through what you experienced. As they celebrated this achievement with impromptu ice cream sundaes, a tradition dating back to Aiden's childhood academic victories, Mason felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with near tragedy had transformed through justice and recovery into new beginning. The corrupt system that had endangered his son had been exposed and reformed. The individuals responsible faced appropriate legal consequences for their actions. And most importantly, Aiden himself had not merely survived, but flourished, finding purpose and meaning through his traumatic experience rather than being diminished by it. Later that night, before retiring, Mason walked through the quiet house to Aiden's room, pausing outside the door where the faint sound of keyboard composition indicated his son was still awake, likely inspired by the day's emotions to create new music. In that moment, reflecting on their journey from that first devastating phone call about Aiden's accident to this point of hope and new possibility, Mason recognized the most important lesson of their ordeal. True victory wasn't found in the destruction of those who had wronged them, but in refusing to let that wrongdoing define their future. Ree Donovan would serve his prison sentence. Lindsay would continue her efforts to earn incremental trust through consistent, appropriate behavior. The corrupt officials would face their legal consequences. Justice had been served, but the real triumph belonged to Mason and Aiden Blackwood, who had faced betrayal, near tragedy, and systematic corruption without allowing bitterness to corrupt their own humanity. They had fought for justice without surrendering to hatred, held accountable without descending into cruelty, and ultimately built something new and meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. As Mason listened to the beautiful music flowing from his son's room, complex, emotionally honest compositions that transformed pain into art, he knew with absolute certainty that they had not merely survived, but transcended. The revenge had served its purpose. Justice had been achieved. Now life, rich with new possibility and hard-won wisdom, could truly begin again. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.